No one wanted the woman with the scar. They'd chosen the pretty ones first, the young ones with soft hands and hopeful smiles. But Eliza Hart stood alone in the blistering sun, dust coating her worn dress, watching her last chance at survival slip away. The auctioneer's gavel was halfway down when a voice like gravel cut through the crowd. "I'll take her." Every head turned. The man was tall, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. He didn't smile, didn't offer comfort, just pointed at her like she was cattle. And somehow, that brutal honesty felt like the first real thing anyone had offered her in years. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The auction block wasn't really a block at all, just a cleared patch of hard-packed earth in front of Thornton's General Store, where the town gathered on the first Saturday of every month to trade goods, gossip, and occasionally women. Eliza Hart had known this day would come. She'd watched it approach like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and terrifying. Ever since the boarding house matron had pulled her aside 3 weeks ago with that practiced expression of false sympathy. "I'm sorry, dear, but if you can't pay next month's rent, well..." The woman had trailed off, letting the implication hang between them like a noose. No money meant no room. No room meant the street. And the street, for a woman alone in 1882, meant death, sometimes quick, usually slow. So here she stood, in a dress she'd mended 17 times, with $32 to her name and a scar on her chin that marked her as damaged goods. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air thick and shimmering. Sweat traced the path of that scar, a pale line through dust and desperation. "Next we have Miss Caroline Pritchard," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of ranchers, farmers, and drifters who'd come seeking wives. 20 years old, fine seamstress, excellent cook." Caroline stepped forward with practiced grace, her blonde hair gleaming despite the dust. She lasted exactly 45 seconds before 3 hands shot up, competing for her attention. The bidding, if you could call it that, since no money changed hands, only promises of home and provision, ended quickly. A wheat farmer with kind eyes and broad shoulders claimed her, and Caroline smiled with what looked like genuine relief. One by one, the women were chosen. Margaret Chen, a Chinese immigrant's daughter with clever hands and a quick mind, chosen by a shopkeeper who needed help with his accounts. Anna Kowalski, barely 18 and terrified, her English broken but earnest, chosen by a young homesteader who seemed almost as frightened as she was. Sarah Mae Johnson, a widow like Eliza but 10 years younger and without visible scars, chosen by a cattle driver who promised her his late mother's house. The crowd thinned, the sun climbed higher, and Eliza remained. She wasn't the only one left. Not at first. There was Martha Grimsby, a woman of 45 who'd lost 3 husbands to various misfortunes and wore her bad luck like a shroud. And there was Pearl, who everyone knew had worked in a Denver brothel before trying to escape that life, though how they knew, Pearl had never discovered. Martha was chosen by an aging prospector who needed someone to nurse his rheumatism more than he needed a wife. He looked at Martha's capable hands and her no-nonsense expression and nodded once, decisively. Pearl stood a little longer, her painted face starting to run in the heat, before a freight hauler with a reputation for drinking but no history of meanness stepped forward. "I ain't much," he told her honestly, "but I got a route and a wagon, and I keep my word." Pearl had looked at him for a long moment, searching for the lie. And when she didn't find it, she'd accepted. And then there was only Eliza. The auctioneer, a thin man named Hoskins, who did this job 4 times a year in 4 different towns, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, gentlemen, we have Mrs. Eliza Hart, widow, 31 years of age, good health, strong constitution." "What happened to her face?" someone called out, and Eliza felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up her neck. Hoskins hesitated. "An accident, some years back, but it don't affect her capabilities none." "What kind of accident?" the same voice pressed, curious and cruel in equal measure. Eliza lifted her chin, the scarred one, and met the eyes of the man who'd spoken. He was young, probably 25, with the soft hands of someone who'd never done real work. A ranch owner's son, she guessed, out here on a lark. The kind where a husband gets drunk and forgets the difference between his wife and a punching bag, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. The kind where a cast-iron skillet fights back. The kind where you end up a widow before 30 and nobody asks too many questions. The young man's face went red. Several of the older ranchers nodded slowly, a few with something that might have been respect in their eyes, but none of them raised a hand. Mrs. Hart is an experienced homemaker, Hoskins continued, recovering his rhythm. Can sew, cook, manage household accounts. She's literate, can read and write better than most. She's old, someone muttered, probably not meaning for her to hear, but she did. 31. Ancient, by frontier bride standards. She's sensible, Hoskins countered, the edge of desperation creeping into his voice. He was paid by placement, and a woman left unchosen reflected poorly on his business. Mature, won't be running off at the first sign of hardship. Won't be bearing many children either, another voice added, this one matter-of-fact rather than cruel. Just stating the truth as he saw it. Eliza's hands clenched in the folds of her dress. It wasn't that she couldn't have children, she'd never been pregnant in 5 years of marriage to Thomas, but that could have been his failing as easily as hers. But she understood the calculation these men were making. They wanted workers and mothers, preferably young enough to provide both for decades to come. The sun beat down. Sweat pooled at the small of her back, soaked the underarms of her carefully mended dress. She could feel the stares of the townspeople, the respectable women in their good dresses, watching with a mixture of pity and judgment. There but for the grace of a husband's continued existence, go I, their expressions seemed to say. Hoskins tried again. Gentlemen, Mrs. Hart represents an exceptional opportunity. For what? The rancher's soft-handed son called out, emboldened by the crowd's previous laughter. Practice? The laughter that followed was sparse but cutting. Eliza felt something inside her shrivel, the last small shoot of hope withering in the brutal heat of public rejection. Now see here, Hoskins began, genuinely angry now, but Eliza raised a hand. It's all right, she said quietly. I understand. She did. She was too old, too damaged, too honest about the violence that had marked her. In a place where women were scarce but specific kinds of women were valued, she represented the wrong kind of survival. She'd fought back against a man who hurt her, and she bore the evidence of that fight on her face. It made people uncomfortable. It made them wonder what kind of woman fought instead of enduring. The kind who wanted to live, Eliza thought fiercely. The kind who refused to die slowly. But that wasn't what these men wanted to hear. Hoskins looked at his ledger, his thin face drawn with frustration. This had never happened before. Not in all his years running these auctions. Every woman placed. That was his record. Every single one. Perhaps, he said, his voice strained, we might adjourn for a brief period. Allow the gentleman to reconsider? Won't make her younger, someone said, not unkindly, just factual. Won't make her prettier, added another. Won't change what's already written on her face, said a third, and that was the one that hurt most because it was truest. Eliza's past was carved into her skin, visible for all to judge. No hiding it, no pretending it hadn't happened. Some women could reinvent themselves on the frontier, leave behind whoever they'd been and become someone new. But not her. She carried her history with her, a scar that told everyone exactly what kind of life she'd survived. And apparently, that made her unmarketable. Mrs. Hart, Hoskins began, and she could hear the apology forming. She saved him the trouble. Thank you for your efforts, Mr. Hoskins. Her voice was steady, which was something. I'll collect my bag. She'd left it by the side of the general store. Everything she owned in a single carpet bag that had once been burgundy but had faded to a tired brown. All her worldly possessions, including the $32 that wouldn't last her 2 months, even if she lived rough. The crowd was already dispersing, the entertainment over. The newly matched couples were awkwardly introducing themselves, negotiating the terms of their arrangements. In a few minutes, wagons would start rolling out, carrying women toward futures that might be hard, but at least were futures. Eliza walked toward her bag, each step feeling heavier than the last. Behind her, she could hear Hoskins closing his ledger with a decisive snap, the sound of failure recorded in ink. She'd almost reached the general store's shade when the voice cut through the afternoon heat like a knife through butter. "I'll take her." 3 words. Rough as gravel, flat as the plains, without inflection or emotion. Eliza froze. Turned. The crowd, which had been breaking up into smaller conversations, went silent. Even the horses seemed to pause their tail swishing. The man stood at the edge of the square, near where the road led north out of town. He must have arrived late. Eliza hadn't seen him during the auction. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a frame that had once carried more weight than it currently did. His face was weathered, tanned dark by years of sun, with lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. A scar, much longer and more vicious than Eliza's, ran from his left eyebrow down across his cheek, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. His hair was dark, shot through with gray despite his apparent age, mid-30s maybe, or hard-lived late 20s. But it was his eyes that struck her, pale gray, almost colorless in the bright sunlight, and completely empty. Not cruel, not kind, just empty, like windows into abandoned rooms. "I'm sorry," Hoskin said, his voice pitching up with surprise. "Did you say—" "I'll take her," the man repeated, not moving from his position. He didn't approach the platform, didn't smile or try to charm, just stood there, making his claim with the same emotion someone might use to purchase a hammer or a length of rope. Hoskins fumbled with his ledger. "Mr. Cole, Jonah Cole." A ripple went through the remaining crowd. Eliza saw recognition in several faces, followed by surprise, followed by something that looked like understanding. "Mr. Cole," Hoskins said carefully, "I wasn't aware you were looking for a wife." "Wasn't. Am now." Jonah's eyes hadn't left Eliza. There was no warmth in that gaze, but no hostility either. He was assessing her the way a man might assess a horse, checking for soundness, capability, durability. It should have been insulting. Somehow, after the last hour of being assessed and found wanting for all the wrong reasons, it felt almost honest. "You understand the terms," Hoskins was saying, recovering his professional manner. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Hart is old enough to know hardship, strong enough to survive it, smart enough to read a contract and keep accounts." Jonah's voice remained flat. "Saw her standing there, listening to fools talk about youth and babies like that's all a woman's worth. Figured any woman who keeps her spine straight through that has value worth considering." Eliza felt something shift in her chest. Not warmth exactly, the man's tone was too cold for that, but recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that she was more than her failures, more than her scar, more than her age. "I've got a ranch," Jonah continued, addressing her directly now. "North of here, 3 days' ride. It's hard country. House needs work. I need someone who can manage a home, help with books, won't panic when things get difficult." He paused. "Things get difficult regular." It wasn't romantic, wasn't even particularly kind, but it was honest in a way nothing else today had been. "What happened to your last wife?" Eliza asked, because she'd learned the hard way that questions unasked led to ugly surprises. Several people gasped at her boldness, but Jonah's expression didn't change. "Don't have one. Never did." "Why not?" "Wasn't worth the trouble before." He tilted his head slightly. "Might be now." "Might be," Eliza repeated. "That's not exactly a declaration of certainty, Mr. Cole." "No," he agreed. "It's not. Won't lie to you and say this'll be easy or that I'm good company, but I keep my word. You'll have a roof, food, safety, work, but not more than's fair. Respect, long as it's mutual." He paused. "Won't touch you except you want it. That clear enough?" It was possibly the most unromantic proposal in the history of the frontier. It was also the most honest thing any man had said to Eliza in 5 years. She looked at Jonah Cole. Really looked. Saw the scars, yes, but also the straight back, the work-hardened hands, the eyes that held nothing but hadn't turned cruel in the emptiness. A man who'd survived something, same as her. A man who wasn't looking for a decoration, or a mother for his children, or a soft body in his bed. A man who maybe, just maybe, wanted a partner in survival. "Your terms," she said slowly. No romance, no promises, just work, safety, honesty. That's it. And if it doesn't work, if we find we can't stand each other, then you leave. I won't stop you, but I won't make you leave neither, not if you're holding up your end. He met her eyes. Won't trap you. Had enough of men who trap women, I'd guess. Eliza's hand went unconsciously to her scarred chin. You'd guess right. So? Jonah shifted his weight, the first sign of impatience he'd shown. Need an answer. Got 3 days' travel ahead and want to make some distance before dark. Eliza looked around the square, at the townspeople watching with fascinated eyes, already composing the stories they'd tell about this strange negotiation. At Hoskins, his ledger open, pen poised hopefully. At the few remaining men who'd rejected her, some looking surprised, others calculating whether they'd made a mistake. She looked at her carpet bag, containing everything she owned. At the general store, where she'd have to beg for credit she couldn't repay. At the road leading back to the boarding house where eviction waited. She looked at Jonah Cole, scarred and empty-eyed and brutally honest. All right, she said. I'll come. Good. Jonah nodded once, then turned to Hoskins. What's the paperwork? Oh, well, we need to establish the terms, have witnesses. No money changing hands, Jonah interrupted. I provide home and provision. She provides domestic management and partnership. Marriage in name for legal protection. Dissolution possible by mutual agreement. That standard? Well, yes, essentially. Then write it up. We'll both sign. Get your witnesses. Make it legal and be done. Hoskins looked flustered but pleased. Of course, Mr. Cole. Mrs. Hart, if you'd both step over here. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of scratched pen on paper, awkward questions about next of kin and previous marriages, and the formal mechanical process of legally binding two strangers' fates together. Hoskins produced a standard contract. Apparently he kept a stack of them for just this purpose. Eliza read every word carefully, while Jonah waited with patient silence. The terms were exactly as stated: provision and protection in exchange for domestic partnership. Either party could dissolve the arrangement with 90 days' notice. Property remained separate unless jointly acquired. No claim on inheritance unless specified by will. It read more like a business contract than a marriage certificate. Eliza found that oddly comforting. They signed. Hoskins and two witnesses, a store clerk and a barber who'd been watching the proceedings with interest, signed as well. And just like that, Eliza Hart became Eliza Cole, wife to a man she'd met 20 minutes earlier. You'll want a few supplies before you head out, Hoskins suggested, already pivoting to his secondary business of outfitting travelers. Mrs. Cole will need... Got supplies, Jonah said. Horse for her too. Bought it this morning in case. He glanced at Eliza. Can you ride? Yes. She'd grown up on a farm before her disastrous marriage. Riding had been as natural as walking. Good. Rather not waste time in a wagon. He started toward the edge of town where two horses waited, a large roan gelding and a smaller bay mare. You got everything in that bag? Everything that matters. Jonah lifted her carpet bag as if it weighed nothing, tying it efficiently behind the mare's saddle. Then he turned to Eliza, and for the first time something almost like emotion flickered in those empty eyes. Last chance, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You get on this horse, we ride north, and your life changes. Might not be the change you wanted. Might be harder than what you're leaving, but once we're gone from here, we're committed, at least for a season, till we know if this'll work. Eliza looked at the mare, at the empty road north, at Jonah's scarred face. My life already changed, she said, the day I fought back instead of taking another beating, the day Thomas hit the floor and didn't get up, the day I became a woman no man wanted. She put her foot in the stirrup, pulling herself into the saddle with muscles that remembered this motion. At least this change, I'm choosing. Something, not quite a smile but close, tugged at the corner of Jonah's mouth. Fair enough. He mounted his own horse with the ease of long practice, settling into the saddle like it was an extension of his body. Then, without ceremony or farewell, he turned the roan's head north and urged it into an easy walk. Eliza followed. Behind them, the town of Silver Creek continued its Saturday afternoon business. Somewhere, newly matched couples were beginning the awkward dance of learning each other. Somewhere, the women who'd been chosen first were discovering whether their choices had been wise or foolish. But Eliza didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, following Jonah Cole into the brutal summer heat, toward a future that promised nothing except honesty and hard work. Somehow, after years of pretty lies and false promises, that felt like more than enough. They rode in silence for the first hour, leaving Silver Creek behind until it was just a shimmer on the southern horizon. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling prairie, yellow grass bent under the weight of heat, interrupted occasionally by scrub brush, and the dry beds of seasonal creeks. The sun hammered down mercilessly, and Eliza was grateful for the bonnet she'd worn, even though it was shabby and the brim had torn months ago. Jonah set a steady pace, not fast but unrelenting. He didn't ask if she needed to rest or if the heat was too much. He simply rode, and she kept up, and the miles disappeared beneath the horse's hooves. It was Eliza who finally broke the silence. "How far north is your ranch?" 3 days in good weather, might stretch to 4 if storms hit." Jonah didn't turn to look at her. "We'll camp twice before we get there. Just the two of us on the trail." She made it a statement, not a question, watching for his reaction. "That a problem?" "Should it be?" Now he did glance back, that empty gray gaze assessing. "You're asking if I'm planning to force myself on you before we even get home." The thought occurred. "Won't happen." He turned forward again. "Told you my terms. I keep my word." "Men say that a lot. Don't always mean it." "Then you married the wrong man before." Eliza couldn't argue with that. "How do I know you're different?" "Don't," Jonah said simply. "Not yet." "Not? Give it time. Watch what I do, not what I say. Actions prove truth better than words." It was, Eliza had to admit, a reasonable answer, and one that showed more self-awareness than Thomas had ever possessed. They rode another mile before Jonah spoke again. "That scar on your face. Your husband gave you that?" "Yes." "What'd you do about it?" Eliza considered lying, then decided against it. Honesty had been promised on both sides. "I hit him with a skillet. He fell, hit his head on the stove corner, didn't get back up." "Good." The single word, delivered without judgment or shock, made Eliza's throat tight. "Good?" "Man who hits a woman deserves what he gets. You defended yourself. Nothing wrong with that." "The law didn't quite see it that way." "Law's not always right." Jonah shifted in his saddle. "They charge you?" "No. But only because Thomas had a reputation. Everyone knew he drank, knew he had a temper, and She touched her scar. "I had evidence. The sheriff called it self-defense and closed the case. But people talked. People always talk. They said I must have driven him to it, that a good wife would have known how to calm him down, that maybe I deserved—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "They were fools," Jonah said flatly. "Any man who needs a woman to manage his temper is no man at all. Just a child in adult clothing, dangerous and stupid." He paused. "You did what you had to do. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of survival." Eliza stared at his back, at the straight spine and scarred neck, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not love. It was far too soon for that, and Jonah had been clear about his lack of interest in romance. But recognition. The bone-deep understanding that she was riding next to someone who knew what it meant to fight for your life and bear the marks of that fight without apology. "What about your scar?" she asked, her voice quiet. "The one on your face?" Jonah was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "War. Confederate blade. Got too close during a skirmish in Tennessee. Man who did it died 30 seconds later, but not before he marked me permanent." "You fought for the Union?" "I fought to free people who were enslaved. That it happened to be under a Union flag was incidental." His voice remained flat, but something in the set of his shoulders suggested old anger, old pain. "Lost friends, lost other things. Came west after, because I couldn't stand to be in places that remembered me different." "Different how?" "Whole. Young. Hopeful." He shook his head. "That man died in Tennessee, same as the one who cut me. What came back was someone else." Eliza understood that too. The person she'd been before marriage, hopeful, romantic, believing in fairy tales, had died the first time Thomas's fist connected with her ribs. What survived was someone harder, more realistic, less trusting. "So we're both ghosts," she said softly. "No." Jonah's voice was firm. "Ghosts are dead. We're survivors. There's a difference." They rode on as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The heat remained oppressive, but Eliza found herself adjusting to it, her body remembering the rhythms of long rides from her childhood. As dusk approached, Jonah led them off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwoods that marked a creek bed. The creek itself was barely a trickle, but it was wet, and the trees provided shade that had already begun to cool in the fading light. "We'll camp here," Jonah said, dismounting. "Water the horses, set up for night. You know how to make camp?" "I can manage." "Good. I'll see to the horses you gather firewood. Enough for cooking and a small fire through the night. Keeps predators cautious." They worked in efficient silence, each handling their tasks with the competence of people accustomed to caring for themselves. Eliza gathered dead wood from the base of the cottonwoods while Jonah unsaddled the horses, rubbed them down, and let them drink from the creek. By the time full dark arrived, they had a small fire crackling, coffee brewing in a battered pot, and strips of salted beef warming on a flat stone near the flames. Jonah handed her a tin cup of coffee, black, strong, bitter, and a portion of the beef wrapped in hard biscuit. "Not fancy," he said. "Didn't expect fancy." Eliza bit into the makeshift sandwich, finding it exactly as unappetizing as anticipated, but grateful for the calories. "This what meals are like at the ranch." "Better. Got chickens for eggs, a garden if the drought hasn't killed it, sometimes venison or rabbit. But on the trail, we travel light." They ate in silence, the prairie night settling around them with its chorus of insects and distant coyote calls. The fire popped and hissed, throwing dancing shadows across Jonah's scarred face. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said eventually, setting down her empty cup. "Can't stop you." "Why did you choose me?" "Really? You could have had one of the younger women if you'd shown up earlier, or waited for next month's auction." Jonah stared into the fire for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because you were honest," he finally said. "When that fool asked about your scar, you told the truth straight out. Didn't make excuses, didn't pretty it up, just said what happened and met his eyes while you did it." He glanced at her. "Most people can't do that. Can't face their own history without flinching. But you can. That's rare. That's why you wanted me, because I can tell an ugly truth?" "Part of it." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Also because you were the only one who asked questions, only one who treated this like a business arrangement instead of a romantic rescue. I don't want someone who thinks I'm saving her. I want someone who understands we're saving each other." Eliza considered this. "Are we? Saving each other?" "You needed a future that wasn't starvation, or worse. I need someone who can help keep the ranch running without falling apart when the work's hard or the winters are brutal." He met her eyes across the fire. "Seems like a fair exchange to me." "No romance," Eliza said, testing the words. "No romance," Jonah confirmed. "Just partnership, respect, honesty. The rest," he shrugged. "The rest is fairy tales, and we're both too old for those." Eliza should have felt disappointed. Part of her, the part that remembered being young and believing in love, did feel a pang of loss. But the larger part, the survivor, felt only relief. No expectations she couldn't meet. No pretending to feel things she didn't. Just two damaged people agreeing to face the world as allies rather than alone. "All right," she said. "Then we understand each other." "Good." Jonah stood, moving to his bedroll. "Get some sleep. We ride at first light. Still got 2 more days ahead of us." He arranged his blankets on one side of the fire while Eliza took the other, the flames between them like a neutral boundary. She lay down, using her carpet bag as a pillow, and stared up at the vast spray of stars overhead, more stars than she'd ever seen in town, the Milky Way a river of light across the black. Somewhere in the darkness, Jonah's breathing evened into the rhythm of sleep. Somewhere beyond their small circle of firelight, The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, and Eliza closed her eyes, a woman with a new name and a new future, built not on love or hope, but on something potentially more lasting, mutual need and unflinching honesty. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of as a girl, but it might, she thought as sleep claimed her, be exactly what she needed to survive. The second day's ride brought them deeper into territory Eliza didn't recognize, where the land rolled in gentle swells like a frozen ocean, and the grass grew shorter, tougher, adapted to drought and relentless sun. The heat built steadily as morning progressed, turning the air thick and heavy, making each breath feel like drinking from a furnace. Jonah maintained his steady pace, occasionally glancing back to check on her, but offering no conversation. Eliza found she didn't mind the silence. After years of Thomas's unpredictable moods, sometimes sullen, sometimes explosively talkative, always dangerous, there was something peaceful about a man who simply existed without demanding constant attention or management. Around midday, they stopped to water the horses at a creek that still ran with reasonable depth, suggesting springs somewhere upstream. Jonah dismounted and immediately began checking his horse's hooves, running practiced hands down each leg, looking for heat or swelling. "Your mare holding up all right?" he asked without looking at Eliza. She copied his movements, checking each of the bay's legs. "Seems fine. No heat, no limping." "Good. We'll rest here an hour. Let them graze and recover. Tomorrow's the longest stretch. No water between dawn and dusk, so we'll need them strong." Eliza led her mare to a patch of grass near the creek and loosened the girth, giving the animal room to breathe. Then she walked to the water's edge, crouched down, and splashed her face and neck, gasping at the shocking coolness against her overheated skin. When she looked up, Jonah was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just, you don't complain much." "Would it help?" "No." "Then why waste the breath?" Eliza stood, wiping her wet hands on her skirt. "Heat is heat. Miles are miles. Complaining won't make them less." Jonah's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "You're practical. I appreciate that. What choice do I have?" She moved to sit in the shade of a scraggly willow. "I learned a long time ago that the world doesn't care about my comfort. Better to accept that and focus on what I can control." "Which is?" "My response, my effort, my decision to keep moving forward even when everything hurts." She pulled off her bonnet, fanning herself with the brim. "That's all any of us can control, really, how we respond to what life does to us." Jonah settled against a rock a few feet away, maintaining that careful distance he'd established since the beginning. "Your husband, Thomas, he teach you that?" "In a way." Eliza's fingers found the scar on her chin, tracing it unconsciously. "He taught me that hoping for mercy from someone who has none is a waste of time, that pretty words mean nothing compared to actions, that survival sometimes means doing things you never imagined yourself capable of doing. Like killing him." It wasn't a question, and Eliza appreciated that he didn't soften it with euphemism or judgment. "Like defending myself, which resulted in his death, yes." "You feel guilty about it?" Eliza considered the question honestly, examining her conscience the way she might examine a wound for infection. "No," she said finally. "I feel relieved, and that probably makes me a terrible person, but it's the truth. He was going to kill me eventually, maybe not that night, but someday. I'd seen it building in him, the escalation. Each beating was worse than the last." She met Jonah's empty gray eyes. "So no, I don't feel guilty for surviving. I feel guilty for not leaving sooner before it got that bad, for believing he'd change, for being naive enough to think love could fix what was broken in him." "Love doesn't fix people," Jonah said quietly. "Only they can fix themselves, and most don't want to." "But is that why you've never married? Because you didn't want to fix yourself, or didn't want someone trying to fix you?" Jonah was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, fixed on something Eliza couldn't see. "Both, maybe. After the war, I wasn't fit for polite company. Wasn't fit for any company, really. Had dreams, memories, things I couldn't talk about and didn't know how to leave behind." He picked up a stone, turning it over in his scarred hands. "Figured I'd make a poor husband. Figured any woman deserved better than a man who woke up screaming half the time and couldn't stand to be touched the other half. And now? Now I'm older. The dreams come less often. I've learned to live with the memories instead of drowning in them. He tossed the stone into the creek, watching the ripples spread. Now I figure a partnership built on honesty might work better than a marriage built on romance anyway. No disappointed expectations. No pretending to be something I'm not. Eliza understood that more than he probably realized. So this arrangement, you really mean it? No expectations beyond what we agreed? I really mean it. Jonah looked at her directly. You keep the house, help with accounts, don't steal from me or try to poison me, and I'll keep you fed, housed, and safe. We treat each other with basic respect. That's the deal. Nothing more, nothing less. And if somewhere down the line one of us wants more, then we talk about it honestly, renegotiate if both parties agree. But I'm not promising something I might not be able to give, and I won't accept promises you can't keep either. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. Honesty first. Always. That's the only rule that matters. Eliza nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle into her bones. Honesty first. It was a brutal standard, one that left no room for the comfortable lies most relationships were built on. But maybe that was exactly what they both needed, truth instead of comfort, reality instead of romance. All right, she said, honesty first. They rode on as the afternoon heat peaked and then slowly began to wane. The landscape shifted gradually, becoming more rugged, with rocky outcroppings interrupting the grassland and occasional stands of pine appearing on north-facing slopes. The air tasted different here, drier and somehow sharper, carrying scents of sage and juniper. As evening approached, Jonah led them up a long rise to a flat plateau that offered views in all directions. We'll camp here, he said. Open ground means nothing can approach without us seeing it. Mountain lions hunt this area sometimes. Eliza felt a flutter of unease but pushed it down. What do we do if one comes? Keep the fire burning, make noise, show ourselves as too much trouble to bother with. He dismounted, beginning the now familiar routine of setting up camp. They're opportunists, not fighters. Looking for easy prey, old, sick, young. Two healthy adults with fire and weapons aren't worth their effort. Weapons, Eliza repeated. Do you have a gun for me? Jonah paused, then nodded. Rifle in my bedroll. I'll show you how to load and fire it after we eat. Can't assume you know, even if you grew up on a farm. I know the basics. My father taught me when I was 12, but I haven't fired a gun in years. We'll practice tomorrow. Find a place where gunfire won't spook the horses too bad. He started gathering wood for the fire. On the ranch, you'll need to be comfortable with both rifle and pistol. I can't always be there if trouble comes, and trouble doesn't wait for convenience. They established camp with the efficiency of people who'd already learned each other's rhythms, despite having known each other barely 48 hours. Eliza found herself anticipating what Jonah would need next. Water for coffee, the cooking pot, a flat stone for heating food. And he did the same, moving around her without getting in her way, their movements complementary rather than conflicting. After they ate, Jonah retrieved the rifle, a well-maintained Winchester that gleamed even in the fading light, and walked Eliza through loading, sighting, and firing procedures. His teaching style was patient but direct, correcting her grip without criticism, explaining the why behind each action. Don't aim at what you want to hit, he said, guiding her hands into proper position. Aim at what you can't afford to miss. Big difference. First is about hope. Second is about necessity. Eliza nodded, feeling the weight of the weapon, its deadly potential. Have you killed people? Besides during the war? 3 men tried to steal my cattle 2 years back. Killed 2, wounded the 3rd. Badly enough, he probably didn't make it to a doctor in time. Jonah's voice remained level, factual. Wasn't happy about it. But they shot first, and I shot better. That's how it goes sometimes. Does it haunt you? Less than letting them kill me would have. He stepped back, creating distance. I'm not saying killing is easy or that it shouldn't weigh on you, but sometimes the choice is kill or be killed, and I'd rather carry the weight of survival than the alternative. Eliza lowered the rifle, her arms already aching from holding the unfamiliar weight. You really think I might need to use this? I think the frontier doesn't ask permission before it tests you. Better to be prepared and never need it than need it and not be prepared. He took the rifle back, unloading it with practiced efficiency. Tomorrow we'll fire a few shots, get you comfortable with the recoil and the noise. For tonight, just know it's here if we need it. They settled by the fire as full darkness descended, the temperature dropping quickly now that the sun had set. Eliza wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, grateful for the warmth of the flames. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, curious now that they were getting close. "What's it like?" Jonah stared into the fire, gathering his thoughts. It's not much by most standards. 160 acres, about half of it usable for grazing. Creek runs through the north section year-round. That's why I bought the land, for the water rights. House is solid, stone and timber, built by the previous owner who gave up after his wife died in childbirth. He just couldn't stand to stay, so he sold cheap and headed back east. Sounds lonely. It is. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles south. Town is 12 miles east. That's where we get supplies, and where I sell cattle twice a year. See other people maybe once a month if I make the trip to town, less in winter. He glanced at her. That going to be a problem? I've been lonely in a crowded boarding house, Eliza said quietly. At least your kind of lonely comes with space to breathe. Fair point. Jonah poked at the fire. House has 3 rooms, main room with kitchen and living area, bedroom, and a small storage room I use for tools and such. There's a loft above the bedroom, accessed by ladder. Might be good for storage or other purposes, depending. Eliza heard what he wasn't saying. Where will I sleep? Bedroom's yours. I've been sleeping in the main room for years anyway. Easier to hear if anything approaches the house, and I like the sound of the fire. He met her eyes. I meant what I said about not touching you. You'll have privacy, a door that latches from the inside, your own space. Relief flooded through Eliza, so intense it made her dizzy. Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. It's basic decency. Jonah's voice held an edge of something that might have been old anger. World's full of men who think marriage gives them ownership. I'm not one of them. You're a person, not property. That's the foundation we're building on. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, wind through grass, the distant call of an owl, the soft breathing of the horses. Can I ask about your ghost? Eliza said eventually. The ones from the war? Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't shut down the question entirely. What do you want to know? Do they still haunt you? The dreams you mentioned? Sometimes. Less now than before, like I said. But yeah, sometimes I wake up and I'm back in Tennessee, hearing screams and cannon fire, smelling blood and gunpowder. He stared at his scarred hands. Sometimes I dream about the men I killed. Not enemies, necessarily, just boys in different uniforms who died because I was faster or luckier or more desperate. I'm sorry. Don't be. I made my choices, same as you did with Thomas. I live with them. He looked at her then, and something in those empty eyes had shifted. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of weary honesty. But I won't lie and say it doesn't cost me. Some nights are harder than others. If you hear me moving around, pacing, or working in the middle of the night, that's why. I'm not dangerous when I'm like that, just restless. I understand. And she did. She had her own ghosts, her own restless nights. I dream sometimes too, about Thomas, about that night. Usually it's him getting back up, coming at me again, and the skillet not being enough. But it was enough. It was. But fear doesn't always listen to logic. Jonah nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. The fire burned lower, and exhaustion pulled at Eliza's bones. 3 days on horseback after months of sedentary city life had left her muscles screaming. She arranged her bedroll with stiff movements, every part of her body protesting. It'll get easier, Jonah said, reading her discomfort. Another week and you'll stop aching. Month and you'll barely notice the work. Bodies adapt faster than minds do. I hope you're right. I am. Seen it happen before. He settled into his own blankets. Sleep now. Tomorrow's the hard day. Long ride, no shade, no water till we reach the ranch. You'll want all the rest you can get. Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the vast darkness pressing in around their small circle of firelight. Somewhere out there was a ranch she'd never seen, a future she couldn't imagine. a life built on the strange foundation of two damaged people agreeing to survive together. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope, small and fragile, but real nonetheless. The third day began before dawn, both of them moving in silent efficiency to break camp and saddle the horses while the eastern sky slowly brightened from black to deep blue to pale gray. They ate cold biscuits and jerky as they rode, unwilling to waste time on a fire. "Stay close today," Jonah said as they started out. "Heat'll be brutal, and there's no water between here and home. If you start feeling dizzy or sick, tell me immediately. Heat stroke can kill faster than a bullet." Eliza nodded, settling into the saddle for what she knew would be a grueling day. He hadn't exaggerated. As the sun climbed, the temperature rose until the air itself seemed to shimmer and pulse. Sweat soaked through Eliza's dress within hours, and her lips cracked despite sipping regularly from her canteen. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions. No trees, no shade, just grass and rock and relentless sky. Around midday, when the heat peaked and the horses were moving sluggishly, Jonah called a brief halt. "We'll rest here for 30 minutes, he said. "Longer and we won't make the ranch before dark, but the horses need recovery time." They stood in the minimal shade provided by a rock outcropping, not sitting because the ground was too hot to touch. Jonah checked both horses carefully, running wet cloths over their necks and flanks, checking their breathing and eyes. "How much farther?" Eliza asked, her voice hoarse despite the water she'd drunk. 4 hours if we keep steady, 5 if we need to slow down." He handed her his canteen. "Drink more. I've got extra water." "What about you?" "I'm used to this." "You're not. Drink." Eliza obeyed, the water tasting of metal and leather, but more precious than wine. "Is it always this hot?" "Summer months, yeah. Winter's the opposite, snow and ice and cold that cuts through every layer. Spring and fall are decent, but they're short." He took back the canteen, drank sparingly himself. "It's hard country, Eliza, beautiful sometimes, but hard. I won't lie about that." "I don't need easy," she said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I need honest. I need real. I've had enough of soft lies and gentle cruelty. Give me hard truth any day." Jonah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then you'll do fine here." They rode on as the afternoon stretched toward evening, the sun beginning its slow descent but the heat barely diminishing. Eliza focused on staying conscious, on keeping her seat, on following the steady shape of Jonah's back ahead of her. Her mind drifted sometimes, heat-addled, and she found herself thinking about the strangest things: her mother's hands kneading bread, the smell of rain on dust, Thomas's face in the moment he realized she'd fought back. "Eliza." Jonah's voice cut through the haze. "Stay with me. We're almost there." She blinked, focusing. The landscape had changed without her noticing. More trees now, pine and juniper, and the ground rising toward a ridge. Ahead she could see the silver glint of water, a creek cutting through a small valley. "That's it," Jonah said, and she heard something in his voice that might have been relief or pride or both. "That's home." The ranch revealed itself gradually as they descended into the valley. The house sat on a rise above the creek, built of gray stone and dark timber, with a steep roof and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. It was smaller than Eliza had imagined, but solidly constructed, the kind of building that could withstand decades of frontier weather. Near the house stood a barn, weathered but functional, and a series of corrals and pens. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard. A large garden plot showed signs of struggle, some plants thriving, others wilted or dead, evidence of drought and neglect. "It's not much," Jonah said, and for the first time she heard uncertainty in his voice. "But it's solid, and it's yours now, too." Eliza stared at the scene before her, the house, the land, the creek that promised life-giving water year-round. It wasn't beautiful by conventional standards. It was rough and worn and showed the marks of hard use. But it was real, it was honest, and it was waiting for someone to care about it again. "It's enough," she said, "more than enough." They rode down to the house as the sun touched the western horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Jonah dismounted first, then helped Eliza down, his hands impersonal but steady when she swayed with exhaustion. "Go inside," he said. "Doors unlocked." I'll tend the horses and bring your things. Eliza walked to the house on legs that felt like wooden posts, every muscle screaming. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into cool dimness that made her gasp with relief. The main room was exactly as Jonah had described, large and open, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove in one corner, and simple furniture arranged for function rather than decoration. Everything was clean but dusty, showing the neglect of a man who'd been maintaining rather than living. Through an open door, she glimpsed the bedroom, a simple bed with a wooden frame, a dresser, a window facing east. Her room now, apparently. The thought felt strange and somehow precious. Jonah entered with her carpet bag and his own gear, setting them down carefully. I'll get the fire going and heat water for washing. You'll want to clean up before eating. I can help. You can barely stand. Sit. I've done this alone for years. One more night won't kill me. Too exhausted to argue, Eliza sank into a wooden chair and watched as Jonah moved through the familiar routines of homecoming, building a fire, hauling water from the creek, setting a pot to boil, pulling supplies from the larder. His movements were efficient, economical, the product of years of solitary life. Within an hour, she'd washed her face and hands in warm water, luxury after days on the trail, and was eating beans and cornbread that Jonah had prepared with surprising competence. "You're a better cook than I expected," she said between bites. "Man who can't feed himself doesn't last long out here." Jonah ate standing up, his gaze constantly moving, checking windows, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for night. "But I won't pretend I'm good at it. Mostly I eat to survive, not for pleasure. If you can make food taste like something other than obligation, I'll appreciate it." Eliza smiled despite her exhaustion. "I can do that." After eating, Jonah showed her around quickly, where supplies were kept, how the stove worked, the routine for feeding the chickens and checking the garden. Then he pointed toward the bedroom. "That's yours. There's a latch on the inside of the door. Use it if it makes you feel safer. I sleep out here most nights anyway, like I said. Chamber pot's under the bed if you need it at night, though there's an outhouse about 30 feet behind the house if you prefer." Eliza looked at the simple bedroom, at the bed that would be hers alone, at the door with its latch. "Thank you, Jonah, for all of this, for choosing me when no one else would, for bringing me here, for giving me a chance at something better." Jonah shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. "Just keeping up my end of the bargain. You do the same, and we'll call it even." "Still, thank you." He nodded once, then turned away. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how this partnership actually works." Eliza entered the bedroom and closed the door, sliding the latch into place with a small sound that felt monumental. For the first time in years, since before Thomas, maybe since her childhood on her father's farm, she felt safe. Not perfectly safe, not without qualification or fear, but safer than she'd been in longer than she could remember. She collapsed onto the bed, still fully clothed, too exhausted to change, and fell into sleep so deep it felt like drowning in dark water. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Eliza woke with the sun, finding Jonah already up and working, feeding animals, checking fences, hauling water. She took over the kitchen, transforming Jonah's simple supplies into meals that actually had flavor and variety. She worked in the garden, identifying what could be saved and what needed to be replanted. She cleaned the house thoroughly, finding satisfaction in imposing order on chaos. Jonah, for his part, maintained his promise of distance and respect. He never entered her room without permission, never touched her except when necessary for work, never made demands beyond what they'd agreed. He taught her ranch tasks patiently: how to milk the cow, how to collect eggs without startling the hens, how to shoot accurately enough to kill predators threatening the livestock. They spoke little at first, communicating mostly through shared work and parallel routines. But gradually, tentatively, conversation began to flow. Over breakfast, over evening meals, during breaks from work, they traded stories, carefully edited at first, then with increasing honesty. Eliza learned that Jonah had grown up in Ohio, the youngest of 4 sons, and had gone to war at 19 full of idealism and returned at 23 full of scars. She learned that he'd drifted west seeking empty spaces where the past couldn't follow, had worked various ranches before saving enough to buy this land 5 years ago. She learned that he valued silence not because he disliked conversation, but because he'd learned to find peace in quiet. Jonah learned that Eliza had been the only surviving child of farmers who died of fever when she was 17, leaving her alone and vulnerable. He learned that she'd married Thomas out of desperation more than love, believing security mattered more than happiness, and learning too late that security built on fear was no security at all. He learned that she read voraciously when she could get books, that she had a sharp mind for numbers and accounts, that she was stronger than she looked. They learned each other's rhythms, habits, preferences. Jonah liked his coffee black and bitter. Eliza preferred hers with milk when available. Eliza woke easily but slowly, needing time to transition from sleep to action, while Jonah woke instantly and fully alert. Jonah worked best in long, focused bursts, while Eliza preferred steady, consistent effort throughout the day. 2 weeks after their arrival, as Eliza was hanging laundry in the morning sun, Jonah approached with an envelope. "It's got a ride to town today for supplies," he said. "Thought you might want to come, see where things are, meet people." Eliza considered this, weighing her desire to see the town against her reluctance to face public scrutiny as Jonah's new wife. "Will people ask questions?" "Probably. Town's small. Everyone knows everyone's business." He met her eyes. "But you'll have to face them eventually. Might as well be now, on your terms, rather than waiting until you've built it up into something scarier than it is." He was right, and Eliza knew it. "All right, give me 10 minutes to change." The ride to town, Jonah called it Clearwater, though Eliza couldn't see any clear water anywhere in the vicinity, took 2 hours on horseback. The settlement was larger than she'd expected, with perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a main street and spreading out along various side roads. There was a general store, a bank, a church, a small schoolhouse, and various other establishments that spoke of a community trying to establish permanence in temporary country. They tied their horses outside Mitchell's general store and supply, and Eliza felt eyes turning toward them immediately. A woman in a blue dress paused in sweeping her porch to stare. 2 men outside the saloon stopped their conversation to watch. "Let them look," Jonah said quietly, offering his arm with formal politeness. "You've got nothing to hide and nothing to apologize for." They entered the store together, and Eliza was immediately hit with the smell of coffee, tobacco, leather, and 1,000 other things packed into the dim interior. A gray-haired man behind the counter looked up, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Jonah, haven't seen you in near a month. Thought maybe you'd finally given up on that ranch and headed for easier country." The man's eyes shifted to Eliza, curiosity naked on his face. "And who's this?" "My wife," Jonah said simply. "Eliza, this is George Mitchell. Runs the best supply operation within 50 miles, also the only supply operation within 50 miles. George laughed, coming around the counter to shake Eliza's hand with genuine warmth. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Wife, you say? Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think Jonah would ever settle down. How'd you manage it?" "Mutual desperation," Eliza said, deciding honesty was simpler than invention, and was rewarded with George's surprised bark of laughter. "I like her already," he declared, grinning at Jonah. "She's got more sense of humor than you do, that's certain." They spent the next hour in the store, gathering supplies while George peppered them with questions that Jonah deflected with practiced ease. Other townspeople drifted in, some with genuine errands, others clearly just curious about Jonah's mysterious wife. Eliza endured their scrutiny with as much grace as she could muster, answering questions politely but without elaboration. It was when they were loading supplies into saddlebags that a woman approached, tall, handsome rather than pretty, with steel gray hair and eyes that assessed Eliza with uncomfortable directness. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your bride?" "Mrs. Margaret Henshaw," Jonah said, and something in his tone suggested wariness. "This is my wife, Eliza." "Mrs. Cole," Margaret Henshaw said, offering a hand that gripped with surprising strength. "I'm the president of the Clearwater Ladies' Aid Society. We'd be delighted if you'd join us for our next meeting. It's a week from Thursday at the church hall." Eliza recognized a command disguised as an invitation. "That's very kind, Mrs. Henshaw, but I'm still settling into the ranch. Perhaps in a few months." "Nonsense. The best way to settle in is to become part of the community. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. We meet every other Thursday at 2 o'clock. Light refreshments are served. It's quite important that ranchers' wives participate. We do essential charitable work and provide vital social cohesion. Before Eliza could respond, Jonah stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between the two women with subtle but unmistakable protective intent. Eliza will attend if and when she's ready, Margaret. We won't be pushed into obligations we didn't agree to. Margaret's expression tightened. I merely thought. We know what you thought. The answer's no for now. Maybe later. Jonah touched Eliza's elbow gently. We should head back. Storm coming this evening. They rode out of town under the weight of speculative stares, and Eliza waited until they were well clear before speaking. What was that about? Mrs. Henshaw seemed intense. Margaret runs clear water with an iron fist disguised as charity work, Jonah said. She means well, mostly, but she's also the biggest gossip in 3 counties and has strong opinions about how people should live their lives. If you attend her meetings, you'll be expected to share every detail of our marriage, our finances, our plans, and anything you do say will be spread across the territory by Sunday. So we're avoiding her? I'm suggesting you decide carefully what you want to share with her and when. She's not malicious, but she is relentless, and I figured you'd had enough people scrutinizing your choices for one lifetime. Eliza felt warmth bloom in her chest. Not romantic warmth, but gratitude for his understanding. Thank you for that. Just keeping my promises, Jonah said. Your business is your business. Share what you want, keep private what you want. That's your right. They rode in companionable silence as clouds built in the west, exactly as Jonah had predicted. By the time they reached the ranch, the first fat drops of rain were falling, and by the time they'd unsaddled the horses and stored the supplies, it was pouring. The first real rain in months, according to Jonah. They stood on the porch, watching water sheet off the roof, drumming on the dry earth with almost musical rhythm. The garden would rejoice, the creek would swell, the parched land would drink deeply and remember, for a little while, what abundance felt like. I'm glad I came here, Eliza said suddenly, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. I know it's only been a few weeks, and I know this is just a practical arrangement, but I'm glad. Jonah glanced at her, and something in those usually empty eyes had shifted, not quite warmth, but perhaps the beginning of it. I'm glad too, he said quietly. Cookie. Turns out having a partner makes things better than I thought they would. Even a scarred, over-the-hill partner nobody else wanted? Especially that kind. Those are the ones who understand what really matters. He turned back to watch the rain. Welcome home, Eliza. And standing there in the storm's embrace, watching water bring life back to thirsty land, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but its quiet precursor. Contentment, the sense of being exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a girl. It was something better, real, honest, and built to last. The rain lasted 3 days, transforming the parched landscape into something almost green, filling the creek until it sang over stones with a voice that promised continuance. Eliza and Jonah worked together in the wet, repairing fence lines weakened by drought and preparing for the work that autumn would bring. The rhythm they'd established deepened during those gray days, their partnership settling into something that felt less like an arrangement and more like an actual marriage, though neither of them spoke the word aloud. It was on the 4th morning, when the sun finally broke through the clouds and steam rose from the wet earth, that the first sign of trouble arrived. Jonah had ridden out early to check the north pasture, and when he returned 2 hours later, his face was set in lines Eliza hadn't seen before. Hard, dangerous lines that spoke of barely contained fury. "What's wrong?" she asked, meeting him at the barn. He dismounted with controlled violence, his movements sharp and precise. "Someone cut the fence on the north section. Drove off about 20 head of cattle, maybe a quarter of my herd." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "Rustlers? Maybe. Or—" He stopped, jaw working, clearly debating how much to tell her. "Or what?" "Jonah, we agreed on honesty." He looked at her then, and she saw genuine worry beneath the anger. "Or it's Victor Hale starting up again." Who's Victor Hale? Jonah led his horse into the barn, speaking as he worked to unsaddle the animal. Owns the Triple H Ranch, about 15 miles west of here. Biggest operation in the territory, 10,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, dozen hired men. Rich, powerful, connected to territorial politicians. He pulled off the saddle with more force than necessary. He's been trying to buy my land for 3 years. Wants the water rights. My creek feeds into the river that runs through his property. Control the source, control the flow. But you won't sell. Can't sell. This is all I've got, and without water, it's worthless. Sell to Hale, and I've got nothing but a handful of cash that'll be gone in a year. Jonah's hand stilled on the bridle. But Hale doesn't like hearing no. First year, he offered a fair price. I declined. Second year, he offered more. I declined again. Third year, he shook his head. Third year, things started happening. Fence cut here, cattle spooked there. Nothing I could prove came from him, but nothing I could ignore either. Eliza felt cold despite the morning warmth. And now? Now I'm married, which means I'm not a lone man anymore who might disappear without too many questions asked. That changes his calculations, makes it harder for him to just wait me out or arrange an accident. Jonah met her eyes. But it also means you're in danger too. I should have told you before we came here. Should have warned you what you were walking into. Would it have changed anything? Eliza asked. I had no other options. You know that. Still, you deserve to know. I know now. So what do we do? Jonah looked surprised. Then something like respect crossed his face. We? You're not suggesting we just pack up and leave? Where would we go? And why should we? This is our home now, our land. If this Hale wants to push, we push back. Eliza surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice, but she meant every word. She'd spent too many years being pushed around, first by circumstance and then by Thomas. She was done running, done accepting defeat before the fight even started. Pushing back against Victor Hale isn't like standing up to a small-town bully, Jonah warned. He's got resources, men, connections. We've got... He gestured around the modest barn. This. And stubbornness. Then we'll make stubbornness enough. Eliza straightened her shoulders. What's the first step? Jonah studied her for a long moment, and she thought she saw something like pride in his expression. First step is reporting the theft to the sheriff in Clearwater. Get it on record, even if nothing comes of it. Then we repair the fence, reinforce the weak points, and start keeping better watch. I'll need to ride patrol more often, which means you'll need to be comfortable handling things here alone. I can do that. Including using the rifle if someone shows up uninvited? Eliza thought of Thomas, of the skillet, of the moment she'd chosen survival over submission. Yes, including that. They rode to Clearwater that afternoon, Eliza insisting on coming despite Jonah's initial resistance. The sheriff's office was a small building attached to the jail, and the man who emerged when they entered was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 35, with sandy hair and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen more than his share of trouble. Jonah, he said, shaking hands with cautious warmth, haven't seen you in town twice in 1 month in all the years I've known you. What's the occasion? His gaze shifted to Eliza with obvious curiosity. My wife, Eliza. Eliza, this is Sheriff Tom Brennan. Jonah's voice was flat, professional. We're here to report a theft. 20 head of cattle driven off through a cut fence on my north section. Brennan's expression shifted immediately to alert attention. When did this happen? Sometime in the last 3 days during the rain. Found it this morning when I went to check on them after the storm. See any tracks? Any indication of who might have done it? Rain washed most of it away, but the fence was cut clean with wire cutters, not broken through. Deliberate. Jonah paused meaningfully. Professional. Brennan's jaw tightened. You thinking what I'm thinking? If you're thinking Victor Hale, then yes. The sheriff sighed, suddenly looking older. Jonah, you know I can't do anything without proof. Hale's got lawyers, good ones, and they'll tear apart anything that isn't ironclad evidence. I'm not asking you to arrest him. I'm asking you to document that this happened, put it on record, so when it happens again, and we both know it will, there's a pattern established. When it happens again, Brennan repeated grimly. You're sure he's not going to back off? He's wanted my water rights for 3 years. Marriage doesn't change that. Might even make him more aggressive, since he knows I'm settling in permanent now instead of just surviving year to year. Jonah's hand found Eliza's back, a gesture of solidarity that she found unexpectedly comforting. I need this documented, Tom. Official and dated. Brennan pulled out a ledger, his movements resigned. All right, tell me everything. When you discovered it, what exactly you found, any details that might be relevant. They spent the next hour going over every detail while Brennan took meticulous notes. When they finally emerged back into the afternoon sunlight, Eliza felt drained, as if reliving Jonah's discovery had somehow exhausted her second hand. Will it help? She asked as they mounted their horses. The report? Maybe, maybe not. But at least it's documented. Jonah urged his horse into motion. Now we go home and prepare for whatever comes next. What came next arrived 5 days later, in the form of 3 men on horseback riding up to the ranch house just after dawn. Eliza was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the sound of hooves and looked out to see Jonah already outside, rifle in hand but held casually, not aimed. She grabbed the Winchester he'd taught her to use and moved to the doorway, staying inside but visible, the weapon held with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. The lead rider was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel set of his mouth. He wore expensive clothes, tailored pants, a fine vest, boots that gleamed even in the morning dust. The 2 men flanking him were younger, harder, with the look of hired guns rather than ranch hands. Jonah Cole, the silver-haired man said, his voice smooth as oil and just as slick. It's been a while. Not long enough, Hale? Jonah's stance remained relaxed, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders. What do you want? Just being neighborly. Heard you got married. Thought I'd come by and offer my congratulations. Victor Hale's eyes shifted to Eliza in the doorway, and she felt the weight of his assessment like dirt on her skin. That must be the lovely bride. A bit older than most men choose, but I suppose beggars can't be choosers. Eliza felt anger flare hot in her chest, but before she could respond, Jonah took a step forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You've got 10 seconds to state your actual business before I decide you're trespassing and act accordingly. Hale's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. My business is simple. I'm prepared to make you a final offer for this property. $8,000, cash, paid immediately. That's more than generous for 160 acres of marginal grazing land. The answer's the same as it's been every time you've asked. No. Come now, be reasonable. $8,000 is a fortune out here. You could buy land somewhere else, start fresh without... Hale glanced around meaningfully. Without the difficulties you've been experiencing lately. Losing cattle is such a terrible thing, and it seems to happen so often on properties that aren't properly managed. The threat was barely veiled, and Eliza saw Jonah's grip tighten on his rifle. My cattle were stolen by rustlers. I've filed a report with the sheriff. Have you? How unfortunate that Sheriff Brennan is so overworked. I doubt he'll have time to investigate thoroughly. Hale's voice remained pleasant, conversational, making the menace underneath even more chilling. Things could get worse, Jonah. Much worse. Cattle dying from poisoned water, barn fires, accidents that happen when people aren't careful. His gaze slid back to Eliza. Especially when there are women involved. The frontier is so dangerous for the fairer sex. Eliza stepped onto the porch, rifle held with deliberate visibility. The fairer sex knows how to defend herself, Mr. Hale, and how to aim. Hale's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. My, she's got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't stop bullets, Mrs. Cole, and accidents don't care how brave you are. Neither do sheriffs care how rich you are when there's enough evidence to hang you, Eliza shot back. We've documented everything. Every cut fence, every stolen cow, every threat you've made. You think you're untouchable, but powerful men have fallen before. Something flickered across Hale's face. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. He'd clearly expected intimidation to work on a desperate woman married to a struggling rancher. He hadn't expected backbone. I'm trying to be reasonable, Hale said, his voice hardening slightly. Make this transaction voluntary, beneficial to all parties. But I will have this water access one way or another. The question is whether you profit from it or suffer for opposing it? The answer's no, Jonah repeated, and now his rifle wasn't quite so casually held. You've heard it 3 times now. Won't change if you ask a 4th. Time for you to leave our property. Hale stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made Eliza's skin crawl. Very well. I tried the civilized approach. Remember that. When things get difficult. Remember I gave you a chance. He wheeled his horse around with unnecessary force, his 2 hired guns following, and they rode off at a canter that kicked up clouds of dust and spoke of barely restrained violence. Eliza and Jonah stood watching until they disappeared from view, neither speaking until the sound of hooves faded completely. Well, Eliza said finally, her voice shaking slightly with residual adrenaline, he's terrifying. Yes. Jonah lowered his rifle and she saw his hands were rock steady despite the tension of the confrontation. But you stood up to him. That was brave, stupid maybe, but brave. You think I should have stayed inside? I think I'm glad you didn't. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not just respect, but genuine partnership. We're in this together now, for real. You understand that? This isn't about a business arrangement anymore. Hale will come after both of us, and he won't care that you're not the one who owns the land. I understand. And she did. She'd chosen this when she agreed to come here, and she was choosing it again now, with full knowledge of what it meant. What do? We get ready. Reinforce the house, set up watch schedules, make sure we're never both away from the ranch at the same time, and we prepare for the likelihood that Hale will escalate. How much can he escalate? Legally, I mean. Jonah's expression was grim. Out here, legal doesn't mean much when you've got money and men. He could hire people to harass us constantly, could poison our water, hard to prove, easy to do, could start fires, kill livestock, make our lives hell in 100 different ways, all while maintaining plausible deniability. He paused. Or he could just have us killed and claim it was an accident or rustlers. Wouldn't be the first time a powerful man eliminated an obstacle that way. Eliza felt ice settle in her stomach, but she refused to let fear control her. Then we make it too expensive for him, too public, too documented, too risky. How? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. Eliza's mind was already turning, thinking through possibilities. He's powerful because people fear him and because he operates in shadows. What if we bring everything into the light, make noise, get witnesses, force him to act openly where everyone can see? Jonah considered this. You're thinking about involving the townspeople? Making this public knowledge? I'm thinking about making it impossible for Sheriff Brennan to ignore what's happening, about creating enough documentation and witnesses that even Hale's lawyers can't explain it away. Eliza met Jonah's eyes. And yes, about getting the town on our side if we can. Hale might own politicians, but he can't own everyone. Some people still care about right and wrong. You're more strategic than I gave you credit for. I survived 5 years with a violent drunk by learning to think 3 steps ahead of him. This isn't that different, just a different kind of threat. Eliza's jaw set with determination. I won't be driven off land that's rightfully ours. I won't run again. Not from Hale, not from anyone. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared. Jonah reinforced the doors and shutters of the house, installing heavy bars that could be dropped into place from inside. He taught Eliza to shoot with increasing accuracy until she could hit a target at 50 yards consistently. They established watch schedules, taking turns staying awake through the night to listen for approaching trouble, and Eliza began making trips to town, deliberately and publicly. She attended the Ladies' Aid Society meeting, enduring Margaret Henshaw's intrusive questions with practiced deflection, and made sure to mention casually that their ranch was experiencing unusual difficulties. She stopped by the general store frequently, building relationships with George Mitchell and his wife Sarah, carefully establishing their story in the community consciousness. You're smart about this, Sarah Mitchell told her one afternoon as they shared coffee in the back of the store, building alliances before you need them. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's paying attention. Most folks just see a new wife settling in, being neighborly, but I see someone preparing for a fight. Sarah's eyes were shrewd but kind. Victor Hale's been pushing people around for years. Most are too scared to stand up to him. If you and Jonah are planning to fight back, you'll have more support than you might think. Quiet support, but support nonetheless. Quiet because people are afraid? Quiet because Hale has long reach and longer memory, but that doesn't mean people don't notice what he does. Doesn't mean they approve. Sarah leaned forward. My brother lost his homestead 5 years back. Hale wanted the timber rights, and when my brother refused to sell, suddenly he couldn't get credit at the bank, couldn't find workers to hire, had accidents that destroyed his crops. Eventually he had to sell for pennies on the dollar or lose everything anyway. Eliza felt anger burn in her chest. The sheriff did nothing? The sheriff is one man with no deputies in a territory the size of some eastern states. What could he do? Sarah's voice held frustration and old grief. But if there was evidence, real evidence that couldn't be ignored or explained away, that might be different. What kind of evidence? The kind that shows clear pattern and intent. The kind that comes from multiple sources, properly documented, maybe with witness testimony. Sarah met Eliza's eyes. The kind that might exist if someone was carefully keeping records and gathering statements from others who've been pushed by Hale. Eliza felt something click into place in her mind. Are there others? Who've been willing to talk about what happened to them? There might be. If they felt safe enough. If they believed something might actually come of it. Sarah stood, moving to check the front of the store before returning. I'm not saying anything official, you understand, just suggesting that if someone were to quietly ask around, they might find people willing to share their stories. Off the record. For now. For now, Eliza repeated, understanding dawning, until there's enough to make it official. Sarah nodded once, and they changed the subject as a customer entered, but Eliza left the store with her mind racing. Evidence, documentation, testimony. These were weapons that might work where rifles couldn't. Hale operated in shadows because shadows gave him deniability. But light was a powerful disinfectant, and the truth, properly marshaled and presented, might be the one thing his money and influence couldn't overcome. She started that very afternoon visiting the homesteads and small ranches within reasonable riding distance of their property. She brought bread, freshly baked, using the precious flour they'd bought in town, as an excuse for the visits, and she listened. She listened to stories of cut fences and poisoned wells, of mysterious fires and cattle driven off, of loans called in early and supplies mysteriously delayed. She listened to 2 decades of Victor Hale's pressure and predation, and she wrote it all down in a ledger she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in their bedroom. Jonah found her there one evening, writing by lamplight long after they'd normally be asleep. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice curious rather than accusatory. "Building a case." Eliza showed him the ledger, pages filled with dates, names, incidents, all meticulously documented. Every person Hale's pushed, every property he's acquired through intimidation, every suspicious accident that happened to someone who stood in his way. It's all here, with witness statements and supporting details. Jonah stared at the ledger, then at her, and she saw something like awe in his expression. "How many people have you talked to?" 15 so far. There are more, but some are too afraid to speak even confidentially. But 15 testimonies, all following the same pattern, all pointing to the same man. She looked up at him. That's not coincidence. That's evidence of systematic intimidation and possibly conspiracy to commit theft and fraud. You sound like a lawyer. My father believed women should be educated. He made sure I could read and reason, even if the world didn't think it necessary. Eliza closed the ledger carefully. I may not have formal legal training, but I understand how arguments are built, how evidence accumulates into proof. And I understand that 15 voices speaking the same truth are harder to silence than one. Jonah sat down heavily on the bed beside her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like hope in his face. You really think this could work? That we could actually build a case strong enough to stop him? I think we have to try, because the alternative is living in fear until he finds a way to drive us out, or... She didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what the alternative was. Or kill us, Jonah finished quietly. Yes, I know. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her hand where it rested on the ledger. Thank you. for fighting, for not just accepting this as inevitable. We're partners, Eliza said simply. Your fight is my fight now, and I'm tired of watching bullies win. They sat together in the lamplight, hands touching tentatively, the ledger between them representing hope and defiance in equal measure. The attack, when it finally came, arrived on a moonless night 3 weeks after Hale's visit. Eliza was on watch. They'd been alternating 4-hour shifts for weeks now, sitting in the main room with the Winchester across her lap and a lamp turned low for just enough light to see by. She heard the horses first, multiple sets of hooves moving too quickly and too deliberately to be anything innocent. She was on her feet instantly, grabbing the spare rifle and moving to the bedroom door. Jonah, she called quietly but urgently. Company, multiple riders coming fast. He was awake and armed in seconds, years of military training making him instantly alert. Together they moved through the house, barring the door, checking that the shutters were secured, positioning themselves at windows that gave views of different approaches. The riders, she counted 5 distinct shapes in the darkness, circled the house once, clearly assessing defenses. Then, without warning, gunfire erupted, bullets slamming into the walls and shutters with brutal force. Eliza dropped to the floor instinctively, her heart hammering, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. This was it. This was Hale making his move, trying to drive them out or kill them outright, counting on darkness and surprise to give him the advantage. But they'd prepared for this. They'd war-gamed scenarios, practiced responses, made themselves ready. Hold your fire until we have clear targets, Jonah called from his position at the front window. Don't waste ammunition on shadows. The gunfire continued for perhaps 30 seconds, an eternity when you're under attack, then stopped abruptly. In the ringing silence that followed, Eliza heard voices, though she couldn't make out words. Then came the smell. Smoke. They're trying to burn us out, Jonah said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Standard tactic, set fire to the barn or outbuildings, force us to come out to fight it, pick us off when we're exposed. Eliza's mind raced. The barn held their winter hay, their tools, their saddles. Losing it would cripple the ranch even if they survived the night. But going outside was almost certainly a death sentence. We can't let the barn burn, she said. We can't go outside. Then we make them think we're trapped while we're actually preparing to move. Eliza was already moving as she spoke, grabbing their pre-positioned water buckets, the wet blankets they'd prepared for exactly this scenario. I go out the back window. It's small enough they might not expect it, and the garden wall gives me cover to reach the barn. You provide covering fire from the house to keep them focused on the front. That's insane. You'll be killed. Maybe. Or maybe I save our barn and our livelihood while you pick off anyone stupid enough to show themselves. She met his eyes in the dim light. We can't both go, and you're the better shot for covering fire. This is the only option that has a chance of working. Jonah looked at her for one long moment, and she saw a dozen emotions cross his face: fear, anger, respect, something that might have been the beginnings of love. Then he nodded curtly. 3 minutes. I'll create a distraction at the front, make them think we're trying to break out there. That's your window. Move fast, stay low, and don't try to be a hero. Wet down what you can and get back inside. 3 minutes, Eliza confirmed. And Jonah? Don't get killed. I'd hate to have to run this ranch alone. His laugh was short and sharp, more release of tension than humor. Yes, ma'am. They moved to their positions. Eliza stripped off her heavy skirt. It would only slow her down. Working in her petticoat and boots, the rifle slung across her back, wet blankets, and a bucket in her hands. At the small back window, she waited, heart pounding, every muscle coiled for the sprint of her life. From the front of the house, she heard Jonah open a shutter and begin firing in controlled bursts, accompanied by shouted challenges that would draw attention. The riders responded immediately, concentrating their fire on the front of the house. Now. Eliza squeezed through the narrow window, grateful suddenly for her lean frame, and dropped to the ground, immediately rolling behind the garden wall as a bullet whined overhead. Someone had spotted her, but the shot was hasty, panicked. She ran. 30 yards to the barn, across open ground lit by the growing fire that had been set on the barn's east side. Time stretched and compressed simultaneously, each step feeling like an hour. the entire sprint happening in heartbeats. Bullets kicked up dust around her, one so close she felt the wind of its passage against her cheek. She hit the barn wall hard, gasping, already swinging the wet blankets at the flames that were crawling up the old timber. The fire was young yet, not fully established, and the rain-soaked blankets smothered it in sections, buying precious time. From the house, Jonah's rifle spoke with methodical precision. She heard a cry of pain, a curse, and knew at least one shot had found its mark. Eliza worked frantically, beating at flames, soaking sections with water from her bucket, moving with desperate efficiency. Her lungs burned from smoke, her arms screamed with effort, but she couldn't stop. The barn, the winter hay, their survival, it all depended on the next few minutes. "Fall back! Fall back!" The shouted order came from somewhere in the darkness, followed by the sound of horses wheeling, retreating. The attack was breaking off. But why? They'd had the advantage, had nearly succeeded in their arson. Why retreat now? Then Eliza heard it. More horses coming from the south at a gallop, and voices calling out identification. "Sheriff's posse! Drop your weapons!" Brennan. The sheriff had come, though Eliza couldn't imagine how he'd known to come tonight of all nights. The attackers scattered into the darkness, and suddenly the night was full of movement and confusion and shouting. Eliza sagged against the barn wall, still clutching her wet blanket, watching as the fire she'd been fighting sputtered and died, reduced to smoking char and ash. Jonah found her there moments later, pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace that surprised them both. "You're alive," he said, and she heard the wonder and relief in his voice. "You're actually alive. So are you." Eliza pulled back, suddenly aware of how close she'd come to losing him, to losing this partnership they'd built, to losing the future they were fighting for. "Who sent Brennan?" "I did." The new voice came from behind them, and they turned to see Sarah Mitchell dismounting from one of the posse horses, her dress dusty and her face determined. "Well, George and I did together. We've had someone watching Hale's ranch for the past week. After what you told me, Eliza, I figured he'd make a move eventually. When we saw his men riding out tonight, armed and purposeful, we rode straight for the sheriff." Brennan approached, his face grim in the lamplight that someone had brought from the house. "Caught 2 of them trying to escape. Recognized 3 others. All work for Hale." He looked at the damaged barn, the bullet-pocked house. "This is attempted murder and arson. I can finally arrest him. There's no talking his way out of this." "He'll try," Jonah warned. "He's got lawyers, influence. He's got 15 testimonies against him now," Eliza interrupted, moving to retrieve the ledger she'd hidden before the attack. She held it up, smoke-stained but intact. "Documented evidence of 20 years of intimidation, theft, and violence. His men just added attempted murder to the list, and you've got witnesses and prisoners who might testify to save themselves." She looked at Brennan. "That enough to make charges stick?" The sheriff took the ledger with something like reverence, flipping through pages of meticulous documentation. "More than enough," he said quietly. I've never seen anything like this. How did you—" "I asked questions. I listened. I wrote it all down." Eliza's voice was steady despite the adrenaline still singing through her veins. "Hale's been getting away with this for decades because his victims were too scattered, too afraid, too isolated. I just brought their voices together in one place." Brennan looked at her with open respect. "Ma'am, you just built a case that territorial prosecutors dream about. With this and tonight's attack, we can bring him down. Really bring him down." "Then do it," Jonah said, his arm around Eliza's shoulders in a gesture of solidarity and protection. "End this. End him." The arrest of Victor Hale 3 days later was the biggest news Clearwater had seen in a decade. Federal marshals came from the territorial capital, brought in specifically to ensure no local corruption could interfere with justice. Hale's ranch was searched, revealing documents that proved decades of illegal land acquisition, intimidation, and worse. But it was Eliza's ledger, combined with the testimony of his captured men, who chose cooperation over hanging, that sealed his fate. The trial was scheduled for the territorial court, where Hale's local influence meant nothing, and the weight of evidence meant everything. Standing on their porch 2 weeks after the attack, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs now, free from threat, Eliza felt Jonah's hand find hers. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did. she agreed. You did mostly. That ledger, those testimonies, I'd still be fighting a losing battle if not for you. Eliza turned to look at him, seeing in his face something she hadn't seen before. Not just respect or gratitude, but genuine affection. Maybe even love, though neither of them had used that word yet. Partners, she said simply. That's what we agreed. Your fight, my fight. Your victory, my victory. Partners, Jonah repeated, and his smile, rare, precious, transformed his scarred face into something almost beautiful. Best decision I ever made, taking you home that day. Eliza thought about the auction, about standing alone in the sun while everyone else was chosen, about the moment Jonah's rough voice had cut through her despair with 3 simple words. I'll take her. Best decision I ever made, she said, was accepting. They stood together as darkness fell, 2 scarred survivors who'd fought for their future and won, ready now for whatever came next. The weeks following Hale's arrest brought a strange kind of peace to the ranch, the sort that comes after a storm has finally passed and the world slowly remembers how to be still. Eliza found herself waking without the immediate spike of adrenaline that had become routine, found herself able to work in the garden without constantly scanning the horizon for threats. The tension that had wound through her muscles for months began, gradually, to unwind. But peace, she discovered, brought its own challenges. Without the immediate threat of Hale's aggression to focus on, without the daily urgency of survival overshadowing everything else, she and Jonah were left to figure out what their marriage actually was beyond a strategic alliance. It was Jonah who broached the subject first, on an evening in late September when the air had finally cooled enough to make outdoor work pleasant rather than punishing. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the last light fade from the western sky, when he spoke. I've been thinking, he said, his voice careful in the way it got when he was trying to express something difficult. About us. About what happens now. Eliza felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. What do you mean? I mean, we got married out of necessity. Made it work because we had to, because Hale was threatening us and we needed to be united to survive. He turned to look at her, his scarred face serious in the twilight. But that threat's gone now. Hale's awaiting trial, his men are scattered, and no one else seems interested in pushing us off our land. So the question is, what are we now? What do we want to be? It was the conversation Eliza had been both hoping for and dreading. What do you want us to be? Jonah was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the darkening landscape. Honest answer? I don't know. I agreed to a business arrangement, a partnership for survival. And that's what we've been, good partners, better than I expected. You're strong, smart, brave in ways I didn't anticipate. He paused. But somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like just business, and I don't know what to do with that. Eliza's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to match his honesty. I feel it too. The shift. We're not just partners anymore. Or rather, we're more than just partners. But I don't know what name to give it, or if it needs a name at all. Do you want more? Jonah asked bluntly. More than what we agreed to? Because if you do, I need to know if I can give it. And if I can't... He stopped, struggling with words. I don't want to disappoint you. Don't want to promise something I'm not capable of delivering. What do you think you can't deliver? Romance? Poetry. The soft emotions people expect in a marriage. His hands clenched on his knees. I'm not that man, Eliza. War and hardship burned a lot of that out of me. I can offer respect, partnership, loyalty, all the things we already have. But love, the way people talk about it in songs and stories. He shook his head. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. Eliza reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses, the scars, the strength in his fingers. Can I tell you something? I don't need poetry or romance. Thomas gave me pretty words in the beginning, told me I was beautiful, that he'd protect me, that our love would conquer anything, and then he used his fist to show me what his words were actually worth. She squeezed his hand. You've never given me empty promises. You've given me honesty, respect, partnership, safety, real safety, not the illusion of it. That matters more than 1,000 romantic declarations. But is it enough? For a real marriage, I mean, not just a convenient arrangement? What's a real marriage? Eliza countered. Is it the fairy tale? where two people fall madly in love and passion sustains them through everything? Because I've seen that fairy tale, and it crumbles the moment reality intrudes. Or is it two people choosing each other, day after day, building something solid and lasting through shared work and mutual respect? She met his eyes. I know which one I'd rather have. Jonah's expression shifted, something that might have been hope flickering in those usually empty gray eyes. So you're saying? I'm saying I want to keep choosing you, keep building what we've started. And if that grows into something that looks like love, the real, complicated, unglamorous kind, then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I don't need you to be someone you're not, Jonah. I just need you to keep being honest with me. He pulled her hand to his chest, holding it there over his heart. I can do that. Honesty, partnership, choosing each other. That I can promise. Then that's enough, Eliza said, and meant it. They sat together as full darkness fell, hands clasped, having named what was growing between them without prettying it up or making it into something it wasn't. It felt right, true in a way that fairy tales never had been. The changes came gradually after that conversation, small shifts that accumulated into something significant. Jonah began touching her more often, a hand on her shoulder as he passed, fingers brushing hers when they worked side by side, his body angling toward hers in unconscious seeking. Eliza found herself doing the same, the careful distance they'd maintained beginning to close in increments. They started sleeping in the same room, not the same bed yet, but Jonah moved his bedroll into the bedroom, claiming his back was bothering him from the hard floor of the main room. It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but Eliza appreciated that he'd found a way to ask for closeness without demanding intimacy she might not be ready for. Is this all right? He asked the first night, arranging his blankets on the floor near her bed. I can go back to the main room if you'd rather have privacy. Stay, Eliza said, surprised by how much she wanted him there. I sleep better knowing you're close. Same, he admitted quietly. They fell into new routines. Morning coffee shared on the porch before the day's work began. Evening meals stretched longer, with conversation flowing more easily now that they'd acknowledged what they were becoming. Jonah taught Eliza to ride better, to shoot more accurately, to read the signs of weather and wildlife that made the difference between preparedness and disaster. Eliza taught Jonah that food could be pleasure rather than just fuel, that a home could have beauty as well as function, that vulnerability wasn't the same thing as weakness. It was in mid-October, as the first frost touched the prairie and turned the grass golden brown, that the children arrived. Eliza was working in the garden, pulling up the last of the vegetables before winter killed them entirely, when she heard horses approaching. She looked up, hand instinctively moving to the rifle that was never far from reach these days, and saw Sheriff Brennan riding toward the house with two small figures on the horse behind him. "Jonah!" she called, and he emerged from the barn, immediately alert to the potential threat. But Brennan's face wasn't hostile. It was tired and sad in a way that made Eliza's heart clench before she even knew why. He dismounted and helped the two children down, a boy of perhaps 8 and a girl who couldn't be more than 5, both filthy, underfed, and looking at the world with the hollow eyes of children who'd seen too much. "Jonah, Eliza," Brennan said wearily. "I'm sorry to come unannounced, but I've got a situation, and you're the only people I could think of who might help." "What happened?" Jonah asked, his gaze on the children with something that might have been recognition, not of them specifically, but of what they represented. "Homesteaders about 15 miles north, the Patterson family. Cholera swept through their wagon train on the way here. Parents died 3 days ago, along with most of the other adults. These two are orphans now, and there's no family to take them, no resources to send them back east." Brennan's jaw was tight with frustration and grief. "Town's got no orphanage, no system for this kind of thing. And winter's coming. Can't just leave them to fend for themselves." Eliza was already moving toward the children, seeing their fear, their hunger, their desperate need for someone to care. "What are their names?" "Boy's called James, girl's Mary." Brennan looked between Jonah and Eliza. "I know it's asking a lot, and you've got no obligation, but I thought, you've got room, and you seem like decent people, and these kids need someone." "We'll take them," Eliza said, not even looking at Jonah for confirmation, knowing somehow that he'd agree. And he did, without hesitation. Temporarily or permanent? Up to you. Could be temporary till we find something else. Could be permanent if you're willing. Brennan crouched down to the children's level. James, Mary, these are Mr. and Mrs. Cole. They're good people and they're going to look after you now, all right? James, the older child, looked at his sister, then at Eliza and Jonah, his young face trying to assess whether they represented safety or another threat. You gonna hurt us? No, Jonah said, his voice gentle in a way Eliza had rarely heard. We're not going to hurt you. We're going to feed you, give you a place to sleep, keep you safe. That's a promise. Promises don't mean nothing, James said with the bitter wisdom of a child who'd learned that lesson too early. Adults always lie. Some do, Jonah agreed, but not all. You don't have to trust us yet. Trust is earned, not given. But give us a chance to show you we're different, and then you can decide for yourself. Something in Jonah's honesty seemed to reach the boy where false cheerfulness wouldn't have. He nodded slowly, then looked at his sister. We stay together, though. Mary don't go nowhere I don't go. Agreed, Eliza said. You stay together, always. That's not negotiable. Brennan left shortly after, relief evident in his posture as he rode away, and Eliza and Jonah were left with two traumatized children who looked at them with suspicion and desperate hope in equal measure. Let's start with food, Eliza said practically, ushering them toward the house. When did you last eat? Day before yesterday, James admitted. Maybe longer. Time's fuzzy. Then food first, bath second, bed's third. Everything else can wait. Eliza's voice was matter-of-fact, but inside she was reeling. Children. They had children now, at least temporarily. Children who needed them, who'd lost everything, who were looking to them for the kind of safety and care she and Jonah were only just figuring out how to give each other. The first few days were difficult. Mary barely spoke, clinging to her brother with silent desperation. James was protective to the point of aggression, positioning himself between his sister and any perceived threat, including Eliza and Jonah. Both children ate like they expected the food to be snatched away, bolting their meals and watching for danger. They've been hurt, Jonah said quietly one evening after the children had finally fallen asleep, both in the same bed, tangled together like puppies seeking warmth and security. Not just grief from losing their parents. Someone hurt them before that, probably multiple someones. You see it in how they flinch, how they watch hands, how they never turn their backs completely. Like recognizes like, Eliza said softly, thinking of her own scars, Jonah's war-haunted eyes. We've all been damaged by violence. Maybe that means we're the right people to help them heal. Or maybe it means we're broken ourselves and shouldn't be trusted with broken children. Or maybe it means we know exactly what they need because we've needed it ourselves. Eliza turned to look at him. Safety, honesty, consistency. The knowledge that the adults in their lives will do what they say they'll do, that violence isn't lurking behind every corner, that they're allowed to be children instead of tiny soldiers in constant survival mode. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it is straightforward. Eliza thought about Thomas, about the years of walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of her husband she'd encounter from moment to moment. Children need to know what to expect. They need rules that don't change based on adult moods. They need to feel safe enough to test boundaries without fearing brutality. We can give them that. Can we? Jonah's voice held doubt, old and deep. I've got nightmares, Eliza. I wake up sometimes ready to fight. What if I scare them? What if I hurt them without meaning to? Then I'll be there to wake you gently, and we'll explain to them what nightmares are, that they're not real, that people who have them aren't dangerous. She took his hand. You think you're the only one with ghosts? I dream about Thomas at least twice a week. I wake up swinging sometimes, convinced he's come back from the dead. But we manage our demons. We don't let them control us. We can teach James and Mary to do the same. Slowly, tentatively, the children began to settle. Mary started speaking in whispers, then in quiet sentences, then, on a morning 3 weeks after they'd arrived, with actual laughter when one of the chickens stole a biscuit right out of her hand. James began to relax his constant vigilance, allowing himself to play occasionally instead of only working and worrying. Eliza taught them reading and basic arithmetic, using a slate and the few books she'd managed to accumulate. Jonah taught them ranch skills, how to feed animals, how to collect eggs, how to identify plants and tracks and weather signs. Both children absorbed knowledge like thirsty earth drinking rain, their sharp minds having been starved for stimulation. It was Mary who first called Eliza Mama about 6 weeks after their arrival. She said it casually, asking for help with a button on her dress, and then froze, realizing what she'd said, terror flooding her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean... My mama's dead. I shouldn't..." Eliza knelt down, taking the child's small hands in hers. "Mary, your mama will always be your mama. Nothing changes that, and nothing should. But if you want to call me mama too, that's all right. People can have more than one mama in their hearts, the one who gave them birth and the one who takes care of them after. There's room for both." "Really?" Mary's eyes were huge, hopeful, and frightened at once. "Really? And if you'd rather call me Eliza or Mrs. Cole or anything else, that's all right too. You get to choose what feels right." Mary thought about this seriously, then nodded. I think Mama Eliza. So I remember both." "Mama Eliza," Eliza repeated, feeling her throat close with emotion. "I like that very much." James was harder, more resistant to attachment, but gradually he too began to thaw. It was Jonah who finally broke through his defenses, not with gentleness, but with practical demonstration. A barn cat had kittens in November, and one of them, the runt, too small and weak to compete for milk, was rejected by its mother. James found it crying in the cold and brought it to Jonah, his face carefully blank but his hands cradling the tiny creature with desperate gentleness. "Cat's gonna die," he said flatly, offering it to Jonah. "Too small. That's just how it is." Jonah took the kitten, examining it with the same careful attention he'd give to any injured animal. "Probably. But maybe not. Sometimes the runts surprise you, turn out to be the toughest ones, if they survive the hard start." "You think so?" "I know so. I was the runt of my family, smallest of 4 boys, sick more often than not. Everyone expected me to die before I turned 10, but I'm still here, 36 years later, and tougher than any of my brothers turned out to be." He looked at James. "Being small or damaged at the start doesn't mean you're meant to fail. Sometimes it just means you've got to fight a little harder to survive. And sometimes that fight makes you stronger than people who never had to struggle." James stared at him, and Eliza saw something crack in the boy's careful armor. "Can we try? To save it?" "We can try. No promises. Nature's got its own rules and doesn't much care what we want. But we can give it a chance." They bottle-fed the kitten, James mainly, with Jonah teaching him the technique, every few hours for 2 weeks. Eliza came downstairs one night to find both of them asleep in chairs by the fire. The kitten snuggled against James's chest, rising and falling with his breathing. The sight of Jonah watching over them, scarred, war-haunted Jonah, keeping vigil over a traumatized boy and an abandoned kitten, made something in her chest squeeze tight with feelings she couldn't quite name. The kitten survived. James named it Runt, with the proud defiance of someone reclaiming a word that had hurt him. And from that day forward, he began calling Jonah Pa, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence as Jonah proved himself worthy of the title through daily consistency and care. Winter came hard that year, with snow falling in November and not fully relenting until March. They were trapped together in the house for weeks at a time, and Eliza learned that close quarters could be a blessing rather than a curse when you were with the right people. They played games, told stories, worked on lessons and crafts. Jonah taught James to whittle, while Eliza taught Mary to sew. They read books aloud by firelight, acted out stories, sang the few songs they collectively knew. One evening in January, as they were all gathered by the fire, Mary curled against Eliza's side, James leaning against Jonah's chair, Runt purring in the boy's lap. Eliza felt Jonah's hand find hers across the space between their chairs. "Is this what happiness feels like?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear under the children's chatter. "I've forgotten. Haven't felt it in so long." "I think so," Eliza whispered back. "I think this is exactly what it feels like." It was also in the depths of that winter that Eliza finally confronted the legal chains of her past. She'd been avoiding it, pushing aside the knowledge that her marriage to Thomas, though effectively ended by his death, had never been properly resolved in legal terms. There were documents, properties held in joint names, debts she might still be liable for. "I need to go back," she told Jonah one morning as they were working together to repair tack in the barn while the children played in the hayloft above. "To Silver Creek, where Thomas and I lived. I need to settle his estate properly, make sure everything is legally clear. Otherwise, it could come back to haunt us, affect the ranch, the children, everything we're building." Jonah's hand stilled on the leather he was working. "You want me to come with you? Could you? It's a week's journey there and back, and I'd feel better not traveling alone. We could leave the children with Sarah Mitchell. She's offered before, and they know her well enough now not to be frightened. Then we'll go, soon as the weather clears enough for travel." He met her eyes. "This is about more than just legal documents, isn't it? This is about facing the place where he hurt you, proving to yourself that you're not that trapped woman anymore." Eliza was continually surprised by how well he understood her. "Yes, that too. I need to close that chapter completely, not just in my head, but in reality. I need to stand in that house as someone who survived and rebuilt, not as a victim still running." They left in late February, when the worst of the snow had melted and the roads were passable if muddy. The children cried when they left, especially Mary, who'd become anxious about separation after losing so much already. But Sarah Mitchell was patient and kind, and she promised to let them help with her baking every day, which eased the transition. Silver Creek looked smaller than Eliza remembered, meaner somehow, as if her memories had inflated it into something more significant than the shabby collection of buildings actually warranted. The house where she'd lived with Thomas was still standing, now occupied by renters who looked at her with suspicious eyes when she explained she'd come to settle the previous owner's affairs. The lawyer's office was cramped and dusty. The lawyer himself, a thin man named Carmichael, officious and disapproving in the way of men who thought women shouldn't handle business matters. "Mrs. Hart," he said, deliberately using her previous married name despite her introduction as Mrs. Cole. "I must say, your husband's death left quite a mess. Debts, unpaid bills, property liens." "My late husband's death," Eliza corrected firmly. "I'm remarried now, and I'm here to resolve any outstanding issues so they don't affect my current family. What exactly am I liable for?" Carmichael shuffled papers with exaggerated importance. "Well, there's the matter of the house itself, jointly owned, but the mortgage is in arrears. Sell it. Use the proceeds to pay the mortgage and any other debts. I have no interest in that property. There's also the matter of debts to local merchants. Make me a list. I'll pay what's legitimately owed, but I won't be responsible for bar tabs or gambling losses that occurred after I left town." They went back and forth for 2 hours, Carmichael trying to intimidate her into accepting responsibility for Thomas's excesses, Eliza standing firm on what was fair versus what he was trying to manipulate her into. It was Jonah, sitting quietly in the corner, who finally intervened. "My wife has been more than fair," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "She's offered to pay legitimate debts and resolve property issues. If you continue attempting to pressure her into accepting responsibility for her deceased husband's character flaws, we'll be forced to consult with an attorney who understands the actual law rather than making up convenient fictions." Carmichael deflated like a punctured balloon. "No need for that kind of talk. I'm merely trying to ensure you're trying to extract as much money as possible from a woman you think is vulnerable. She's not. Draw up fair settlement papers, and we'll sign them. Try to cheat her again, and you'll deal with me." The papers were fair after that, surprisingly so. Eliza signed away any claim to Thomas's property in exchange for being released from his debts beyond what could be covered by selling his assets. It was done within another hour, her legal connection to that chapter of her life severed cleanly and permanently. Walking out of that office, Eliza felt lighter than she had in years, as if she'd been carrying weight she hadn't even noticed until it was gone. "Thank you," she told Jonah as they headed toward the boarding house where they'd taken a room for the night, "for backing me up in there, for not letting him bully me." "Partners," Jonah said simply. "Your fight is my fight, remember? That night, in the boarding house room, Eliza finally closed the distance between them that had persisted even as everything else drew closer. She crossed to where Jonah stood by the window, took his scarred hand in hers, and kissed him, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence when he responded with gentle hunger. "Is this all right?" she asked when they broke apart, both breathing hard. "Is this something you want?" "Yes," Jonah said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you're sure, if you're ready, I don't want to rush. I'm sure. I'm ready. I want to stop surviving and start living, and that includes this, includes you, includes us becoming something real in every way, not just legal or practical." They made love slowly, carefully, two scarred people learning each other's boundaries and pleasures, building intimacy with the same patience they'd brought to everything else in their partnership. It wasn't the passionate romance of fairy tales. There was too much history, too much trauma, too much caution for that. But it was real and honest and theirs, built on months of trust and mutual respect, and that made it more precious than any fantasy could have been. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Jonah spoke into the darkness. "I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly, maybe gradually, maybe all at once when I saw you fighting that barn fire. But I do. Love you, I mean. And I know we said this wasn't about romance, but I need you to know." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, good tears for once. "I love you too, and you're right. This wasn't supposed to be about romance. But maybe we built something better than romance. Maybe we built something that can actually last." "What's that?" "Partnership that became friendship, that became love. The kind that's tested and proven instead of assumed and hoped for." She pressed a kiss to his scarred shoulder. "The kind that's real." They returned home to chaos, good chaos. The kind generated by two energetic children and one mischievous cat who'd apparently learned to open cabinet doors. Sarah Mitchell looked exhausted but amused as she handed them back. "They're good children," she said. "Challenging sometimes, but good. You're doing well with them." After she'd left, James and Mary dragged them to see everything that had happened while they were gone. New kittens in the barn, a robin's nest spotted under the eaves, a picture Mary had drawn of their whole family including Runt. And in that picture, crude as it was with the 6-year-old's artistic skill, Eliza saw what they'd become. A family. Real and complicated and scarred, but a family nonetheless. That night, with the children finally asleep and Jonah's arms around her in what had become their shared bed, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Standing alone at that auction, unwanted and certain she was facing a future of slow starvation or worse. She'd accepted Jonah's offer out of desperate necessity, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found something worth living for. Multiple somethings, a partner who valued her, children who needed her, land that was truly home, a future that held genuine possibility instead of just grinding endurance. "What are you thinking?" Jonah murmured sleepily against her hair. "That I'm grateful for all of this, for you choosing me when no one else would, for everything we've built. I'm the one who should be grateful. You saved us, from hail, from loneliness, from just surviving instead of actually living." His arms tightened around her. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliza Cole." She turned in his embrace, kissing him softly. "Then I guess we saved each other." "Yeah," he agreed, and she felt him smile against her lips. "I guess we did." Outside, spring was approaching, bringing with it the promise of renewal and growth. Inside, two damaged people and two traumatized children were building something that looked like happiness, messy and imperfect and more real than any fairy tale could ever be. And for all of them, it was more than enough. Spring transformed the ranch with a violence of renewal that still surprised Eliza, even after a full year of watching the seasons turn. Wildflowers erupted across the prairie in waves of color, purple lupine, yellow balsam root, white prairie stars. And the creek swelled with snowmelt until it sang a different song entirely, full-throated and jubilant. The children grew like weeds, James shooting up nearly 2 inches, seemingly overnight, Mary losing the hollow-cheeked look of starvation and filling out into sturdy health. It was May when the letter arrived, brought by a rider from Clearwater, along with the regular supply delivery. Eliza recognized the official seal immediately, Territorial Court, and felt her stomach clench with old anxiety, despite knowing Hale had been locked away for months. "What is it?" Jonah asked, seeing her face as she held the unopened envelope. "Court seal. Must be about Hale's trial." She broke the seal with fingers that trembled slightly, unfolding the stiff paper. Her eyes scanned the formal language, translating legal terminology into plain meaning, and then she looked up at Jonah with something like wonder. "He's been convicted. 20 years in territorial prison for conspiracy, intimidation, theft, and attempted murder. And there's more. All his ill-gotten properties are being redistributed to their rightful owners or sold at auction to compensate his victims." "It's really over then." Jonah's voice held a note of disbelief, as if he'd never quite believed justice would actually prevail. "It's over. He can't hurt us anymore. Can't hurt anyone." Eliza read further, her breath catching. "Jonah, they're compensating us. For the stolen cattle, the property damage, and..." She looked up, eyes wide. "For my work documenting his crimes. The prosecutor is recommending the territorial government pay me for the investigative work that made the conviction possible. $300. $300? Jonah took the letter, reading it himself to confirm. "That's more than most people make in a year." "It's recognition," Eliza said softly. "Official recognition that what I did mattered, that I helped bring down a man who'd been terrorizing this territory for decades." She felt tears prick her eyes and didn't try to hide them. "A year ago, I was standing on an auction block, unwanted and worthless. Now the territorial government is thanking me for work that changed lives." Jonah pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You were never worthless, but I'm glad the world is finally seeing what I saw that day." "What did you see?" Eliza asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "A survivor. Someone who'd been beaten down but refused to stay down. Someone with enough spine to stand alone in the sun while fools judged her, and enough strength to meet my eyes when I offered her a life that was anything but easy." He pulled back to look at her. "I saw someone worth choosing, even if no one else did." The children burst through the door then, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to collect eggs, and the moment shifted from tender to chaotic in the way that had become their family's natural rhythm. But Eliza tucked Jonah's words away in her heart, treasure to be examined later in quiet moments. That evening, after the children were asleep, Eliza and Jonah sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The $300 sat between them in thought, if not in physical form, representing possibility and choice in a way that felt almost dangerous after so long having neither. "What should we do with it?" Eliza asked. "The money, I mean." Jonah was quiet, considering. "What do you want to do with it?" "I asked you first. And I'm asking what you want, not what you think I want or what would be most practical. What do you actually want, Eliza?" It was the kind of question she still wasn't used to being asked, the kind that assumed her desires mattered as much as anyone else's. She thought about it seriously, examining her wants honestly instead of immediately dismissing them as impractical or selfish. "I want to make the children's adoption legal and permanent," she said slowly. "I know we've been acting as their guardians, but I want it official. I want them to be ours in every way so they never have to worry about being taken away or given up." She paused. Is that something you want too?" "Yes," Jonah said immediately, no hesitation. "I want that. Been thinking about it for months, but wasn't sure how you felt. Didn't want to pressure you into keeping them if you weren't certain." "I'm certain. They're ours. They've been ours since the moment they arrived, and Mary first called me Mama." Eliza felt relief wash through her. "So that's one thing. Legal adoption. What else?" "School," Jonah said. "A real school for them. The one-room schoolhouse in Clearwater is 7 miles away. Too far for daily travel, especially in winter. But with that money, we could build a small schoolhouse here. Maybe convince a teacher to come live on the property in exchange for room and board. Make sure James and Mary get the education they deserve." "And other children too," Eliza added, her mind already spinning possibilities. "There must be other ranch families with children too scattered to attend regular school. We could offer to teach them here a few days a week. Create something that benefits the whole community. You'd be willing to take that on?" Teaching other people's children on top of everything else? Eliza thought about it, about the woman she'd been versus the woman she was becoming. Yes, I think I would. I never had children of my own before James and Mary, never thought I would. But teaching them, watching them learn and grow, it's satisfying in ways I didn't expect. And maybe sharing that with others is a way of paying forward the second chance I got. Then that's what we'll do. Legal adoption, build a school, hire a teacher to help. Use the money to build something lasting, something that makes this place better, not just for us, but for everyone. Jonah reached for her hand. Seems fitting, somehow. Using money earned from fighting injustice to create opportunity for children who need it. They set their plans in motion with the same determination they'd brought to everything else. The legal adoption required trips to Clearwater and meetings with territorial officials, all of whom were surprisingly amenable once they understood the situation. Orphans were common on the frontier, and families willing to take them in permanently were rare enough to be encouraged rather than questioned. The day the adoption was finalized, Judge Morrison, the same judge who'd presided over Hale's trial, signed the papers with a flourish and then looked at Eliza with respect that still felt new and precious. Mrs. Cole, I want you to know that your work on the Hale case was extraordinary. The documentation you provided was more thorough than what most trained investigators produce. Have you ever considered working in a legal capacity? We're always in need of people who can conduct research and compile evidence. Eliza blinked, startled. I'm a rancher's wife. I have children to raise. And you're also someone with a keen mind and a talent for uncovering truth. The two aren't mutually exclusive. He handed her a card. If you're ever interested, contact this office. Even part-time work, a few cases a year, would be valuable. And it pays reasonably well. She tucked the card into her pocket, not committing but not refusing either. The idea that she could be something beyond wife and mother, that her skills had value in the wider world, was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Riding home with the adoption papers safely stored in Jonah's saddlebag, legal proof that James and Mary were permanently theirs, Eliza felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. Not the fairy tale completion of finding romantic love, but something deeper and more solid, the sense of having built a life deliberately, piece by piece, that actually fit the person she'd become. They're really ours now, she said to Jonah as they rode. No one can take them away. They were always ours. This just makes it official. He glanced at her. You thinking about the judge's offer? Maybe. Not now. There's too much to do with the school and the ranch. But someday? Maybe. It's nice to know I could if I wanted to. She paused. Does that bother you, the idea that I might do work beyond the ranch? Why would it bother me? You're not my property, Eliza. You're my partner. If you want to use your skills to help people and make money doing it, I'm proud of you, not threatened. He smiled slightly. Besides, having a wife who's personally responsible for bringing down the most corrupt landowner in the territory has certain advantages. People respect you, and by extension, they respect us. It was true. Over the months since Hale's conviction, Eliza had noticed a shift in how people treated her in town. The women who'd once looked at her with pity or judgment now sought her opinion on matters both practical and personal. Men who'd dismissed her as an aging spinster no one wanted now tipped their hats respectfully and asked about her methods for documentation and evidence gathering. She'd become someone of importance, not through marriage or beauty or youth, but through her own actions and capabilities. The school project began in earnest that summer. They chose a site near the creek, close enough to the house for convenience, but far enough for the children to feel like they were going somewhere important. Jonah and several neighboring ranchers, men whose families would benefit from the school, worked together to build a sturdy log structure with real windows, a stone fireplace, and enough space for 15 children comfortably. Finding a teacher proved easier than expected. Margaret Henshaw, the formidable president of the Ladies' Aid Society, approached Eliza at church one Sunday with a surprising proposition. My niece, she said without preamble, recently completed her normal school training back east. She's looking for a position but doesn't want to be trapped in a city. Would you consider hiring her? She's young but capable, and she's willing to live on a ranch if the accommodations are decent. Eliza had learned to look past Margaret's brusque manner to the genuine kindness underneath. What's her name? Catherine. Catherine Henshaw. 22 years old, sensible, well-educated, and desperate to make a difference. Rather like you, actually. It was as close to a compliment as Margaret ever gave, and Eliza accepted it as such. Have her come visit the ranch, meet the children, see what she'd be working with. If we all agree it's a good fit, the position is hers. Catherine arrived 2 weeks later, a small, intense young woman with ink-stained fingers and a passion for education that reminded Eliza of herself in younger years, when the world had still seemed full of possibility. She spent 3 days at the ranch teaching James and Mary, exploring the half-finished schoolhouse, and asking detailed questions about expectations and curriculum. On the evening of her third day, sitting at the Cole family dinner table with children laughing and Runt the cat weaving between chair legs begging for scraps, Catherine made her decision. "I'll take the position," she said. "This is exactly what I wanted, a chance to make a real difference, to teach children who are hungry for learning, to be part of something meaningful. When can I start?" "School term begins in September," Eliza said, "but you're welcome to move into the teacher's cottage any time before that. It's small but comfortable, and you'll have privacy while still being close enough for safety and companionship." "Then I'll be here mid-August to prepare." Catherine looked around the table, at this family that had formed from broken pieces and stubborn hope. "Thank you for this opportunity. I won't disappoint you." "I know," Eliza said, and meant it. She recognized the determination in Catherine's eyes, the same determination that had kept her standing straight on that auction block, that had driven her to document Hale's crimes, that had helped her build a life worth living from nothing but necessity and stubbornness. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the small schoolhouse filled with children. Not just James and Mary, but 8 others from neighboring ranches, ranging in age from 5 to 13. Catherine proved to be an inspired teacher, combining traditional lessons with practical frontier skills in a way that kept even the most restless students engaged. Watching through the schoolhouse window one afternoon, seeing Mary confidently reading aloud to the younger children while James helped Catherine demonstrate long division on the chalkboard, Eliza felt Jonah's arms wrap around her from behind. "You did this," he murmured against her hair. "Built something that's going to change lives for years to come. Those children in there are getting opportunities they never would have had otherwise, all because you refused to accept that survival was enough." "We did this," Eliza corrected. "You built the school, provided the land, supported every decision. This is ours, like everything else." "Ours," he agreed, and she felt him smile. "I like the sound of that." The years that followed brought the usual mixture of triumph and hardship that characterized frontier life. Drought years tested their resilience, but the creek never ran dry, and they learned to conserve and plan for scarcity. Harsh winters trapped them for weeks at a time, but their stores were well managed and their house was warm. James grew into a thoughtful young man who loved working with animals and showed early promise as a veterinarian. Mary developed a gift for teaching that suggested she might follow in Catherine's footsteps someday. Other children came too, over the years. Not adopted formally like James and Mary, but fostered temporarily when circumstances left them needing a home. Some stayed for months, others for years, all of them leaving with the knowledge that family could be chosen rather than just inherited, that love could exist without conditions, that survival could transform into something more like thriving if you had people who believed in you. The ranch prospered. Jonah's careful management and Eliza's meticulous record-keeping turned their modest operation into one of the most successful in the territory. They never became wealthy by Eastern standards, but they achieved something more valuable: security, comfort, and the freedom to make choices based on what they wanted rather than what desperation demanded. Eliza did eventually take on investigative work, starting with small cases for the territorial court, and gradually building a reputation as someone who could uncover truth where others saw only confusion. She worked perhaps 4 cases a year, enough to stretch her mind and contribute meaningfully to justice, but not so much that it consumed her life. The money she earned went into a fund for the children's futures, for school improvements, for helping neighbors in need. It was on a summer evening some 5 years after that first auction, with golden light slanting across the porch and the sound of children's laughter drifting from the schoolhouse, where Mary was teaching James's arithmetic to the younger students, that Jonah brought up the question that had been hovering unspoken between them for months. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Accepting my offer that day? Coming here instead of, I don't know, finding some other option?" Eliza looked at him with genuine surprise. "Other option?" "Jonah, there was no other option. I was out of money, out of time, and out of hope. You offered me survival when everyone else offered me nothing." "But that's just it. I offered you survival, not happiness. Hard work, not comfort. A business arrangement, not love." His scarred face was troubled. "I think about that sometimes. About whether you deserved something better than what I could give you. Better than a partnership built on honesty and mutual respect? Better than a home where I'm valued for my mind as much as my domestic skills? Better than children who call me mama and mean it? Better than a husband who sees me as an equal rather than property?" Eliza took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Jonah, I don't regret a single moment. Not even the hard parts, because they taught us what we were capable of surviving together. But you could have had romance, poetry, all those things women are supposed to want. I had those things with Thomas, remember? Pretty words that masked ugly reality. I'll take your honest silence over false poetry any day." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, we did find love. Maybe not the way it happens in novels, but something real and lasting and earned. Isn't that better?" "It's better," he agreed quietly. "It's so much better than I ever thought I deserved. We both deserved it. We just had to build it ourselves because no one was going to hand it to us." Eliza leaned against him, comfortable in a way she'd never been with Thomas, safe in a way she'd thought she'd never feel again. "I was the last bride chosen, the one nobody wanted, and that turned out to be the best thing that could have happened, because it meant I ended up with you." Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons and growing children. James left at 18 to apprentice with a veterinarian in Denver, promising to return and establish a practice in Clearwater where his skills would be desperately needed. Mary, at 16, was already teaching alongside Catherine, having discovered her calling early and pursued it with single-minded determination. More children cycled through their home. Some stayed weeks, others years. Each one left with the same gift Eliza and Jonah had given James and Mary, the knowledge that they were worthy of love, capable of surviving hardship, and deserving of a future built on their own terms rather than someone else's limitations. The school expanded twice, eventually serving 25 children from ranches within a day's ride. Catherine married one of the neighboring ranchers, a widower with 3 children who'd fallen in love with her patience and intelligence, but continued teaching, now with her stepchildren among her pupils. Eliza's investigative work grew more prominent. She was called to the territorial capital twice to consult on complex cases, and her methodology for documenting evidence became standard training for new lawmen throughout the territory. She never sought fame or recognition, but both found her anyway, and she learned to accept them with the same pragmatic grace she brought to everything else. Through it all, the partnership between Eliza and Jonah deepened in the way that only time and shared adversity can forge. They learned each other's rhythms so thoroughly that words often became unnecessary. They weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, with the unshakable certainty that whatever came, they'd face it together. They built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of survival transformed into thriving, of scars acknowledged rather than hidden, of love earned through daily choice rather than assumed through romantic fantasy. It was some 20 years after that first auction that Eliza found herself sitting on the same porch, now weathered but solid, watching the sun set over land that was undeniably, permanently home. Jonah sat beside her, gray now threading heavily through his dark hair, his face more lined but still strong. Their hands were clasped as they had been countless evenings before, fingers intertwined with the automatic intimacy of decades spent side by side. "Mary's getting married next spring," Eliza said, though Jonah already knew, to that teacher from the Eastern School District, the one with the excellent library. "Good match for her. He'll appreciate her mind." Jonah smiled slightly, though I pity the man trying to keep up with our Mary in an intellectual debate. "She gets that from you. The logical thinking, the careful analysis." Eliza squeezed his hand. "James wrote again. He's definitely coming back next year, bringing a wife with him. That rancher's daughter from Denver he's been courting. They want to settle here, establish his practice in Clearwater like he always planned. So both our children thriving, building their own lives, making their own choices. Jonah's voice held satisfaction and maybe a trace of wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe they'd managed to raise two damaged children into healthy, capable adults. We did something right somehow. We did a lot of things right. Not perfectly. No one does that. But right enough that they're happy, productive, confident in themselves and their futures. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable with the contact in a way that had taken years to build, but now felt as natural as breathing. And they'll pass that on to their children, the knowledge that family is built through choice and love rather than just blood and obligation. Speaking of grandchildren, Jonah said carefully, how do you feel about that? About getting older, this phase of life? Eliza considered the question honestly. She was in her early 50s now, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines marking her face that spoke of laughter and hardship in equal measure. Her body carried the wear of decades of hard work, and sometimes her joints protested cold mornings in ways they hadn't when she was 30. I feel grateful, she said finally. Grateful I lived long enough to reach this phase. Grateful I have a partner who values me regardless of my age. Grateful for children who became adults I actually like spending time with. Grateful for a life that has meaning beyond just enduring until death. She lifted her head to look at him. 20 years ago, I was convinced my life was essentially over. That I'd survive maybe, but never actually live again. And here I am, looking forward to grandchildren, to watching our legacy continue, to growing old with someone I genuinely love. How could I be anything but grateful? When you put it that way, Jonah's eyes, those gray eyes that had been empty when she first met him, but had gradually filled with life and warmth and something that looked like contentment, were suspiciously bright. When you put it that way, I'm grateful too, for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led us here. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent and stars began to emerge. Around them, the ranch hummed with the quiet activity of evening, chickens settling for the night, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the creek singing its eternal song. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm through windows, suggesting home and safety and permanence. Do you remember what you said that first day? Eliza asked. At the auction? I'll take her, Jonah quoted, 3 words that changed everything. No romance, no poetry, no promises of happiness or love, just 3 flat words that sounded more like buying livestock than choosing a wife. Eliza smiled. And somehow that brutal honesty was exactly what I needed. What we both needed. Think it would have worked if I'd been romantic about it? Swept you off your feet with pretty declarations? No, Eliza said with certainty. I'd have been waiting for the lie to reveal itself, for the mask to slip. I'd have been too afraid to trust it. But your honesty, that I could believe, that I could build on. She turned to face him fully. You gave me truth when everyone else offered either pity or rejection. That was the real gift, Jonah. Not the home or the safety or the partnership, though those were all precious. The real gift was being seen honestly, valued realistically, and chosen anyway despite all my visible flaws and failures. There were no flaws, Jonah said firmly, just scars that proved you'd survived things that would have destroyed weaker people. Just age that meant you'd lived long enough to develop real wisdom. Just honesty that made you trustworthy in ways prettier, younger, more perfect women couldn't match. We saved each other, Eliza said softly. That's what really happened. You needed someone who wouldn't expect you to be something you couldn't be. And I needed someone who wouldn't punish me for being exactly who I was. And in the space created by that mutual acceptance, we built something neither of us expected. Actual love, actual family, actual happiness. Not the fairy tale kind. Better than the fairy tale kind. The real kind. The lasting kind. Eliza kissed him gently. The kind that survives drought and winter and attacks by powerful enemies. The kind that raises damaged children into healthy adults. The kind that gets stronger over time instead of fading. They sat together until full darkness fell and the temperature dropped enough to drive them inside. Tomorrow would bring the usual work, ranch management, school responsibilities, whatever cases Eliza had pending, the constant maintenance that frontier life demanded. But tonight, they simply existed together. Two scarred survivors who'd chosen each other and built something extraordinary from that simple, honest choice. In the years that followed, grandchildren did come. First James's 3, then Mary's 2, all of them growing up knowing that family could be complicated and imperfect, but still filled with love. They heard stories of their grandmother standing alone at an auction, unwanted and seemingly at the end of hope. They heard about their grandfather's scarred face and empty eyes, about how he'd chosen the woman no one else wanted and changed both their lives with 3 simple words. But mostly, they learned through watching Eliza and Jonah work side by side into old age, their partnership never weakening even as their bodies did. Watching the respect and affection that flowed between them earned over decades of choosing each other every day. Watching how they treated foster children with the same care they gave their own grandchildren, extending family to anyone who needed it. When Eliza was 68 and Jonah 72, they sat on that same porch with their oldest grandchildren, James's daughter Anna, age 15 and fiercely intelligent, and Mary's son Thomas, age 13 and already showing signs of his grandfather's quiet strength. "Tell us again," Anna requested, as she had many times before, "about the auction, about how you met." Eliza and Jonah exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication possible only after decades of partnership, and smiled. "I was the last one left," Eliza began, her voice still strong despite her age. "Everyone else had been chosen. The young ones, the pretty ones, the ones without visible scars or complicated histories. And I stood there in the sun, watching my last chance at survival slip away, certain I was done for." "And then Grandpa said," Thomas prompted, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it again anyway. "I'll take her," Jonah finished, his voice rougher now but still carrying that same flat honesty that had defined their first exchange. Not romantic, not promising anything except truth and hard work, but honest in a way nothing else in her life had been for years. "And you said yes," Anna said, "even though he was a stranger and you were scared." "I said yes because I had no other choice," Eliza corrected gently, "but also because something in his honesty spoke to something in me that recognized a kindred spirit. Someone else who'd been damaged by life but refused to let that damage define them." "Tell them the important part," Jonah said, squeezing Eliza's hand with fingers that were gnarled with age and arthritis, but still strong in the ways that mattered. Eliza looked at her grandchildren, these young people who would carry forward the legacy she and Jonah had built from nothing but necessity and stubborn hope. "The important part is that nobody wanted me. I was too old, too scarred, too honest about the violence I'd survived. Every other woman was chosen before me, and I accepted that I'd be left alone to face a future that looked like slow death." "But Grandpa wanted you," Anna said softly. "But your grandfather saw value where others saw ruin. He saw strength where others saw damage. He saw possibility where others saw only a woman past her prime with nothing to offer." Eliza felt tears, good tears, prick her eyes. "And in choosing me, he gave me the chance to become who I actually was instead of who circumstances had tried to force me to be. He gave me the freedom to be scarred and honest and strong and real." "And you gave me the same thing," Jonah added. "The freedom to be damaged without being defined by it. The freedom to build a partnership instead of a performance. The freedom to love in ways that were real instead of romantic." "So what's the lesson?" Thomas asked, his young face serious. "What are you trying to teach us with this story?" Eliza considered the question carefully, wanting to give these children the wisdom earned through decades of hard living. "The lesson is that being chosen last isn't the same as being worthless. That scars prove survival, not failure. That real love, the kind that lasts, is built through daily choice and mutual respect, not through passion or romance. And that sometimes the best things in life come not from getting what you wanted, but from making the most of what you actually get." "Also," Jonah added with the hint of a smile, "that you should never underestimate someone just because they're not young or pretty or perfect. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been beaten down but refuse to stay down. Sometimes the most valuable people are the ones everyone else overlooks. Anna and Thomas sat with this wisdom, absorbing it in the way young people do when they're not quite ready to fully understand but know instinctively that something important is being shared. "Will you tell us more stories?" Anna asked, "about fighting Mr. Hale and the fire and building the school?" "Tomorrow," Eliza promised. "Tonight, it's enough to remember that every story, no matter how hard it starts, can have a good ending if you're willing to work for it." After the grandchildren had been called inside for supper, Eliza and Jonah remained on the porch, reluctant to leave the evening's peace. They were old now, both of them, with more years behind than ahead, but they'd lived those years fully, built something meaningful, left a legacy that would endure beyond their own lives. "No regrets?" Jonah asked, as he had many times over the years. "Not a single one," Eliza answered, as she always did. "You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. But then we would have been different people, younger, less damaged, less honest about our limitations." Eliza leaned into his warmth. "We met exactly when we needed to, when we were both ready for partnership instead of romance, for reality instead of fantasy." "True." Jonah wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they sat together as the stars emerged one by one, ancient light reaching across vast distances to shine down on two old survivors who'd built something lasting from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. In the house behind them, their legacy continued, children and grandchildren and foster families all intertwined, all carrying forward the lesson that family was chosen and love was earned and survival could transform into something approaching joy if you were brave enough to keep choosing it. Eliza Hart, the woman no one wanted, the last bride left standing in the summer sun, had become Eliza Cole, matriarch of a family built on honesty and hard work and the stubborn refusal to let trauma define her. She'd gone from desperate survival to purposeful living, from worthless cast-off to valued community member, from victim to victor. She was the bride nobody wanted. She became the woman everyone remembered. And in the end, that transformation, slow and painful and earned through decades of daily choice, was worth more than any fairy tale could ever be. "I love you," Jonah said into the gathering darkness, his voice rough with age and emotion. "For all of it. For being strong enough to survive until we found each other. For building this life with me. For never giving up, even when giving up would have been easier." "I love you too," Eliza whispered back. "For choosing me. For seeing me. For giving me the chance to become more than survival, more than fear, more than my scars and my past." "Partners," Jonah said, as he had said countless times before. "Partners," Eliza agreed. "Always." And as the night settled around them and the prairie wind sang its eternal song, two old survivors held each other close and remembered the day 3 words changed everything. The day a scarred rancher looked at an unwanted woman and said with brutal honesty, "I'll take her." It hadn't been romantic. It hadn't been poetry. It had been something better. It had been the beginning of truth. And truth, they'd learned, was the only foundation strong enough to build a life worth living. The end.